of 4 waves of attacks. Now, this is almost, if the 250 figure is right, that's almost double the size of the attack that took place in April. Remember, Iran attacking at that time. We suspected that there would be an attack, but this is significantly larger. Israel has warned all of its citizens to take all precautions to try and stay underground if they can. We're certainly hearing the sounds of explosions from Tel Aviv in that feed that is coming from some of the television cameras there. So clearly terrifying moments for people on the ground. And then eventually we'll start to talk about what the response is. Israel has been very clear that if Iran attacks Israel, it is going to respond, and the response is going to be very severe. So we just have to wait and see. 99% of the missiles that were fired at Israel back in April were intercepted. This is double the size. That's a huge test of Israel's resources. Remember, you've got American service personnel on the ground there, as well as American citizens. You've got the U.S. Embassy and obviously lots of other foreign nationals as well. So this will be a terrifying night for many people. You know, we're hearing the sounds of explosions. Again, it's hard at this point to know whether these are intercepts or whether some of these missiles are actually going through. So to stress, we know that this first wave of attacks is now underway. We're told there could be 4. This first wave is over 100 ballistic missiles. There could be as many as 250 in total. Israel has warned that there will be a strong response to Iran. It's been planning this to how to retaliate for a long time, but especially that's been ramped up ever since Hassan Nasrallah was killed. People in this part of the world, here in Lebanon, have been waiting for an Iranian response. Many people have been crying out for it, especially in the Shia world. There's a lot of pressure on Iran to try and respond because its proxies here in Lebanon and elsewhere, certainly Hamas in Gaza, have been under immense pressure from Israel, trying to break this so-called axis of resistance. And this is the response from Iran. But a huge gamble by Iran and a very dangerous night for Israel.
And as you mentioned, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu made it very clear when he was in New York just last week, Ian, saying if indeed Iran was to strike, that they could absolutely expect for Israel to strike back. We are following right now, if you are just tuning in, ABC News has now learned, our Ian panel confirming that Iran has just launched a retaliatory missile attack targeting Israel. Our Matt Gutman now in Tel Aviv. Matt, I understand you have been able to take cover. You are in a shelter. Bring us up to date. What do you know at this moment?
Here, about 90 minutes ago, the first alert started to go out on people's cell phones nationwide, alerting them to start getting toward sheltered areas, bomb shelters, not to congregate. And over the past 15 minutes, they have become much more frequent. Then we heard the announcement from the IDF that Iran's missile attack has begun. And a short time later, we got those messages on our phone: evacuate, immediately move as soon as you can to any kind of bomb shelter. We heard the sirens a short time after that. I'll give you a sense of where we are. It's just a room in this hotel. You can see it's got an air vent as well. We're perfectly safe where we are. We have the rest of our team here on the other side. But this is what most of Israel looks like right now. We don't know how many missiles. We hear 100. It could be more in the coming hours. That remains to be determined. Just as we were running into the shelter, I saw some of those interceptors go up into the atmosphere to try to take out those missiles. It is possible that there have been hits, and the IDF has said all day that they're preparing for this and that the air defenses are solid. They worked in the past in April, knocking out 99% of the missiles, drones, and cruise missiles fired from Iran. But the IDF saying it's not hermetic. We understand at this point that several major Israeli military bases in the Tel Aviv area in the south were targeted. They were evacuated earlier today in recent hours. It was known that that was likely what Iran is going to target. Unclear the damage right now. We're inside, unable to get bulletins, but Israel's obviously bracing for a very, very long night. And it happens, Kira, on the back of what appears to be a shooting attack just about a mile from where we are. 2 armed men entering a train. We understand it was a terrorist attack, according to police, shooting a number of people. Several of them have been critically wounded. So a very jarring night for Israelis here after those successes in Lebanon over the past couple of weeks. And the sirens still going on, Kira.
Our Matt Gutman there in a shelter in Tel Aviv. Our Martha Raddatz, Chief Global Affairs Correspondent, joining us on the phone now. Martha, if you could let us know where you are headed, and just your thoughts here. This strike, clearly a significant escalation. That means a significant amount of risks, and the looming question of how wide this war could become.
Exactly, and I think what the U.S. official who I spoke to today, the senior U.S. official, the greatest concern is that some of those missiles will get through. As we have been reporting in the last little while, 99% of them were intercepted in April, but there is fear that that will not hold this time, and that indeed would point to a wider war. Iran launching perhaps as many as 250 missiles, as we've said, towards Israel. They are certainly aware of the Iron Dome and that the U.S. also has defense mechanisms up as well. But there is a possibility some of those missiles will get through, and what kind of damage they would do will really look towards what kind of response Israel makes. A U.S. official told me it is 100% certainty that Israel will respond to this, and in a vigorous way, even if those missiles do not get through. But if there are injuries, if people are injured, if infrastructure is taken out, if any part of those air bases is taken out, this will significantly increase the chances of a wider war. And that response, again, we don't know when that response will be, but Israel is taking this slow. It also, Kira, they decided not to make a preemptive strike, even Israel, even though they knew these missiles were coming, Iran taking that first hit. And another thing we have to remember, Kira, is we are just days away from the anniversary of October 7th, when Hamas entered Israel and conducted that horrific terrorist attack on Israel, and this is the fallout from all of that.
And just looking at the timeline, Martha, from October 7th, 2023, when Hamas took on that horrendous attack, killing all those innocent people during that music festival, and then looking at a momentary ceasefire between Israel and Hamas a month later. But since then, the deaths of Hamas leaders, commanders within Hamas, other political leaders throughout other countries. And then just in September, the pager explosions that killed Hezbollah leaders in Lebanon, all the way to just last week, and Hezbollah's commander Nasrallah, Hassan Nasrallah, killed in that Israeli airstrike. How do you see this playing out right now as we talk about Iran expecting to launch 240 to 250 missiles in a number of waves here, 4 targets there in Israel, Mossad headquarters, 3 air bases? Martha, stay with us. Let's get back to Matt Gutman. He's in that shelter in Tel Aviv. Matt, bring us up to date.
Kira, we just actually ran out from the shelter to see what was going on outside. The sirens had stopped. They've started again, so we're going to go back towards the shelter. But we just saw something incredibly unusual. There are Israeli soldiers fully kitted out running in the streets, looking like they were looking for something in a bus just downstairs. This country is on tenterhooks right now. It's hard to describe how intense the feeling is for so many Israelis who've been running in and out of these bomb shelters over the past, I guess, half an hour or so. No reports yet about direct hits. We don't know about damage. But again, as the IDF has been saying, we're just going to round this corner. Their missile defense system, as robust as it is, also developed with, take the other one, also developed with the United States, does not provide a hermetic seal against these ballistic missiles coming from Iran. So it's presumed that some of them might get through. We don't know how long this is going to be going on. Martha reported earlier that a very large number of missiles is inbound towards Israel. The Israeli government, of course, has said it will retaliate. We've seen what they've been able to do in Lebanon against Hezbollah over the past couple of weeks. The intelligence apparatus is working very well. I would say that their success, according to them, has been unprecedented. It's unclear what they might have in store for Iran. But what has been quite obvious over the past weeks and months is that they have been able to infiltrate the Iranian intelligence system and the government as well. So they know what the vulnerable points are. We don't know when the retaliation might come. It might not be immediate. But again, right now, everybody in Israel continues to brace and hunker down in their bomb shelters across this country. We don't even know the scope of the missile launches at this point. Don't know how many are intercepted, but clearly this is a more significant and larger barrage than we saw in April. Iran is trying to clearly send a message after its main proxy, Hezbollah in Lebanon, has been nearly decimated by Israel's attacks over the past couple of weeks, Kira.
You know, we talk about the last year. We're coming up on marking October 7th, a year since Hamas attacked Israel. Let me ask you this as well, as you are there in Tel Aviv, Matt. Do you believe there's also a significance to striking so close to a high holiday? I mean, Jewish New Year starts at sundown tomorrow.
I think there is, Kira. I think Jewish New Year starts tomorrow. It is the biggest holiday in Israel. It's sort of like Christmas and New Year's in one here. It's followed by Yom Kippur a few days later, which is the Day of Atonement in Israel. And that is the anniversary on the Jewish calendar of the October 7th attack. So there might be some symbolism there as well. We don't exactly know what is in the mind of the Iranian regime right now. We do know that they feel humiliated after the round of attacks by Israel on Iranian assets across the Middle East. In Yemen, we saw the Houthis being barraged at the Hodeidah port, blown up. Hezbollah in Lebanon has been attacked severely. They are in complete disarray, and Iran clearly felt like it needed some sort of response. And it's unclear that this will be the final response. What does seem apparent, though, is that they broadcast that they were targeting military bases, military installations, and that the attacks are coming later at night. Means there's probably less traffic. It seems that they're also trying to mitigate possible civilian casualties. We don't know that for sure, but that was the modus operandi in the previous attack as well, which came overnight. Unclear exactly what is in the mind of Iran, but clearly they are trying to send a message to Israel, and the next step is going to be a very difficult one. But just to go back to October 7th, Kira, you mentioned the symbolism there. Israel was just starting to recover from the horrors of October 7th and the humiliation that its own intelligence system and its own military suffered at the hands of Hamas, that surprise attack that left over 1,200 Israelis dead. And they had just started to feel like they've regained traction. And with what happened in Lebanon and the new assault there, the ability to clear a part of southern Lebanon without Israeli casualties so far. So this is still rolling, and as Martha warned, there is a significant concern here of a greater regional war breaking out because of the attacks tonight, Kira.
And Martha, let me take it to you as we look at the two waves that are supposed to take place here and the targets, including air bases, in addition to Mossad headquarters. Do we think that there are U.S. personnel at any of those air bases, Martha?
I am told there are U.S. personnel at some of those bases in Israel. And again, the defense forces are up as solid as they possibly can be. I think what you have seen, and Matt mentioned this as well, the intelligence on Hezbollah has been remarkable. The Israelis have really concentrated on that since 2006 and have significantly harmed the Hezbollah structure. I'm just back from Israel. I arrived in Israel the day those pagers went off in Lebanon. It's quite extraordinary. I'm actually on a train to New York City right now, and I am still getting those alerts from Tel Aviv on an app on my phone to take cover as these missiles approach Tel Aviv and other places around Israel. Again, this is expected, according to a senior official, to come in waves. So you may see dozens and dozens, or perhaps 100 in this first wave, and then more after that, and they will assess the damage as soon as they possibly can, the Israelis, and to calibrate their response. I am told by a senior official that one of the responses will be on energy structure in Iran. They will certainly try to cause damage to Iran, and hopefully back off.
Steve Ganyard, I want to bring you in as our ABC News consultant with military and intelligence background. As you are watching what's happening right now, clearly we are entering a new phase of this conflict. Asking Martha about U.S. personnel at some of these air bases, apparently a part of the targets that Iran wants to hit. What would it take in this scenario right now for the U.S. to take a bigger role? Would it mean our U.S. forces in any way, shape, or form being hurt within this conflict? How do you see the U.S. playing a bigger role here, if at all?
Yeah, Kara, I think that the U.S. is doing what they did in April right now. We'll see what happens after the attack is over. But remember, we have U.S. Navy ships offshore of Israel that have the ability to bring down Iranian ballistic missiles. We also have some of that ability in Jordan. If any of these attacks are with cruise missiles, there are U.S. squadrons who are based in Jordan who were key, instrumental last time in stopping some of those attacks back in April. We also have ships in the Red Sea. So to some degree, the U.S. has said that they will help defend Israel. So we just don't know how much involvement that will be. Now, just watching the video, I think that what Matt and Ian and Martha have been talking about this concern about the incoming Iranian missiles overwhelming Israeli defenses may be coming to pass. Unconfirmed, but it does look like there are some impacts around Tel Aviv. We'll have to wait to confirm that. But the number of missiles incoming has always been the concern. There are 3 layers of defense within Israel. We all know about the Iron Dome, which is actually lower altitude. There's a mid-level kind of capability called David Sling, and then the very high altitude that will actually intercept these Iranian ballistic missiles in outer space is called Arrow. So it's a layered defense, but again, so many incoming missiles that we do have to be concerned about the threat of overwhelming and saturating Israeli defenses.
Mary Bruce, let's take it to you at the White House, our chief White House correspondent. I see that the president is putting out messages on Twitter now, about 17 minutes ago, saying that this morning he and the vice president convened with our national security team to discuss Iranian plans to launch an imminent missile attack against Israel. We discussed how the United States is prepared to help Israel defend against these attacks and protect American personnel in the region. What more do we know, Mary?
Well, we certainly know that the White House and the president are monitoring all of this extremely closely. The president and the vice president, they're convening that meeting, as you mentioned, with the national security team at the White House earlier this morning. And we learned from a senior White House official this morning that the U.S. is actively supporting defensive preparations to defend Israel against this very attack. And then that key line, the White House official saying a direct military attack from Iran against Israel will carry severe consequences for Iran. Of course, lots of questions now about what that means. We have, of course, seen the president in recent days speak out forcefully on this, adamant that an all-out war in the Middle East has to be avoided. The big question is how, as you continue to see de-escalation continue, Kira.
Mary, thank you. Let's take it back to our Ian panel in Beirut. Ian, bring us up to date on what is happening there, what you're hearing now.
Yeah, Kira, I mean, look, we've been talking for ages about the risks of escalation. Well, I think we can just say this has escalated, and whether anyone can put a lid on it is an open question. What we're seeing right now is, you can't see it clearly on the camera, is the red dots of tracer fire going into the sky from the southern suburbs. This is Dahya, this is Hezbollah stronghold, the area that's been repeatedly hammered by the Israelis over the last couple of weeks, and people are out on the streets celebrating. Remember, Iran set up this so-called axis of resistance. It was Hamas, it was Hezbollah, other groups as well, especially in Iraq, some of the Shia militias, which are pro-Iranian as well. And we're getting reports, again, not verified in any way, that perhaps there's been some incident near an airbase in Iraq. We certainly saw an attempted attack yesterday by pro-Iranian militias on a base that's believed to house U.S. forces. So for many people, certainly on this side of the border, this will give them succor. They feel that they will be emboldened by what's happening now in Israel, that they're being supported. Iran basically set up Hezbollah. And it has been the major thorn in Israel's side, other than Iran itself. As Matt said, they've been severely weakened over the last few weeks with the pager attacks, then the death of Nasrallah, and these targeted assassinations. Almost its entire leadership has basically been erased. So Hezbollah has been all at sea. We know that Israel has now moved across the border here. So just step back and think about this for a moment. You mentioned this yourself. What began as this terrible attack inside Israel on the kibbutzim at the music festival then grew to that attack in Gaza. Then we saw it stretch to the West Bank. Hezbollah here joined that attack on Israeli forces pretty much for the last year, and now Israel has responded in force. You know, we're talking about 100 missiles here. I mean, Lebanon has received thousands of attacks over the last week or so. Parts of this country are totally decimated. Over around a million people have been forced from their homes, and the casualties are something like 1,600. So, again, many people, certainly here, who are pro-Hezbollah, will say this is payback for Israel. And there will be many other people in Iraq as well, and in Syria, and probably in Yemen, who will also share that view, and they will feel emboldened by this. So attacks in the Red Sea are possible, attacks on U.S. interests in Iraq are possible, further fire from Hezbollah into Israel. You know, this fear that this could develop into a wider conflict, it's kind of happening. It's just whether, when Israel responds, which it will do, to the Iranian attack, whether a lid can be put on it, as happened after April. In some senses, it was calibrated. I'm not convinced that this looks calibrated in the same way, and especially given the Israeli warnings. So we really could be about to see the start of something much bigger. I don't want to scaremonger, but the risks now, when you start having missiles flying into Israel, attacks here, attacks in Iran, attacks in Iraq, then things start to look potentially out of control.
Ian, let's take it from you right back to our Matt Gutman, who's out of the shelter now there in Tel Aviv. He is out on the balcony. Just in light of what Ian just said, Matt, the question remains, as phase one here on behalf of Iran has now taken place, how will Israel respond? How long will Israel wait? What is Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu doing at this moment?
I can tell you what he's been doing over the past 15, 20 years, Kira, and that has been selecting targets. This is something that Israeli intelligence has been talking about for a long time. They know where they want to hit in Iran. They have been thinking about this. They have been accumulating intelligence through analysts, through agents on the ground for many years. They have been prepared for this. They have both the defensive capabilities to knock those missiles out of the sky that are incoming, and offensive capabilities in terms of its air force and their own missiles that are capable of hitting Iran. What they select, how hard they intend to go, remains obviously the biggest question at this point. And I think a lot of it depends on the damage we see here in the coming hours, Kira. We're being told by security sources that the IDF is about to put out the latest bulletin about possible damage. Some of those missiles, or parts of them, have come through. We don't know if there are any casualties yet, but I'm told that they're going to inform us in the coming minutes of what happened. I don't think, from my understanding from just speaking to a military source, that there's any severe damage at that point, and that will certainly calibrate the kind of response that we're going to see from Israel. Just as we got out to this balcony again, we heard additional booms of those interceptors. Now, all of this aerial warfare, Kira, is happening tens of thousands of feet in the air, and those booms that we hear are delayed by seconds. The intercept's happening way out, probably 15 miles from where we are. I saw a couple of them go out just before we ran into the shelter. Now, when we talk about those ballistic missiles, you know, we tend to think of rockets, but these are big. They're almost as long as a bus. And I saw one of the missiles that landed in April, and it was about 38 feet long, minus the engine and minus the cone that housed the actual warhead. So just the fuel tank itself was 38 feet. So these are massive weapons when they are launched, and when they fall, and even parts of them fall, they can cause some pretty catastrophic damage. Now, we understand that Israel's main military bases in the Tel Aviv area, the one that houses its intelligence offices, the Mossad, have been evacuated. Israel's headquarters, at least partially evacuated. Other bases evacuated. They knew this was coming. They tried to get their people out of the way. But I want to show you something else that's happening right now. People are kind of back on the roads. You see police, but there is some traffic, people moving to and fro in the lulls between these sirens. We don't know if there's another wave. It's being reported that there have been well over 100, maybe 50% more than that, missiles fired at this point towards the center of Israel and possibly the south. Everybody here is bracing for additional missiles, I think, certainly before talking about what's next, although I think what is clear, Kira, is that there is going to be a next. The question is, does it happen in Lebanon? Does it happen direct on Iran? It's unclear. One more thing about the missiles, if you'll indulge me. Iran learned from April when it launched 300 cruise missiles and drones and missiles. The cruise missiles and drones were all intercepted. The only thing that got through were those ballistic missiles. That's a siren that's not related to us. That's a police siren. So the only missiles that got through were the ballistic kind, those bus-sized missiles. That's why they only fired those on this round. That's my assumption, at least. And it does appear that some have managed to evade Israel's aerial defense array. Kira.
So let's put this in perspective then, Matt, as you just described the ballistic missile in detail, its capability, its size, the kind of destruction it can leave behind. If we look back to Iran launching it was about 120 ballistic missiles and dozens of cruise missiles and hundreds of drones back in April. You were saying 99% of those were intercepted. Our Martha Raddatz also telling us that as well. Now Iran expected to carry out 2 waves here and launch 240 to 250 missiles, aiming at 4 targets there in Israel, including Mossad headquarters and 3 air bases. Let's talk about, although we want to remind folks when Iran launched those missiles last time around and 99% of them were intercepted, we are talking about double this time around and 2 waves.
Yeah, the potential for damage is much more significant. The biggest concern is the swarming factor, right? If they fire a lot of them at once, Israel's air defenses are incapable of handling, of filtering through all of the missiles. Had they fired maybe 200 at once, it would have been an even bigger threat. But still, salvos of several dozen at a time offers a very complex algorithm for the air defenses to try to knock down. So there's a lot of deconfliction that happens with those missiles. And you talked about the missiles itself and the damage that they can cause. It really depends on what is loaded in the warhead, right? It can be a chemical or biological weapon. It can have a significant amount of ammunition, of explosives, and that also determines how far these missiles go. So if you want them to go farther, you load them with less explosives. And that's what we don't know yet. What was on these things? We don't think that there's any threat of chemical, biological, or atomic warfare at all at this point, but how much explosives were loaded on them, how far did they go, and what specific targets did they hit? We know that some pieces of those missiles have hit Israel. We don't know where and what kind of damage and whether there were casualties at this point. But again, loaded fully with a lot of explosives, of high-end explosives, these kinds of missiles can take out a small apartment building, as Ian and I and Martha have seen in Ukraine. They can do a lot of damage if there is direct hit, Kira.
All right, let's take it to you, Steve. Dig a little deeper here on the capability of these missiles. This is absolutely your forte. Your thoughts on the kind of damage that we could see here as we are awaiting now a second wave of missile attacks on behalf of Iran.
Yeah, Kerry, I think the important point here is that a ballistic missile carries between about 1,000 and 2,000 pounds of high explosive, if that is in fact the payload. But the other part of this is coming in from outer space, so it's probably going several Mach, almost 5, 6, 7 by the time it re-enters the atmosphere, and then that momentum of all that explosive is what creates such damage when they do impact here. But again, the Israelis have the ability to knock these kinds of missiles down. It just depends on how many are incoming. They're very expensive to have a ballistic missile defense, and so the numbers are limited. So we'll see how many have gotten through. They also have the ability to look and see where the impact would be anticipated. So if a ballistic missile was going to land in what they knew was an unpopulated area, the computer within the firing unit would say, oh, I'm not going after that one because I know it's going to land harmlessly. So they have the ability to have that discrimination about whether a missile is going to have an impact either directly or near an airbase. I think, Kira, it's very important to understand here that this is a capability that's very expensive. It's very complex. The Israelis have it because a lot of it has been co-developed with the U.S. The Iranians have nothing. So when the Israelis come to retaliate, and however they do, the Iranians will have no defense against this kind of attack. Israel has all sorts of types of missiles, the same munitions that the Iranians have, even better. And so when the retaliatory attack by Israel onto Iran comes, it will be a very, very different outcome because the Iranians just do not have the kinds of defensive capabilities that the Israelis do.
Let me follow up with that, Steve. Now that Hamas and Hezbollah have largely had their leadership and ability to communicate eliminated, is Iran in this fight against Israel alone?
Well, most of their proxies have been degraded to the point that they're truly ineffective. The Houthis have taken a punch in the nose from the Israelis that have quieted them for the past couple of days. We know what's going on in Gaza with Hamas. We know what's going on in Lebanon with Hezbollah. The Shia militias within Iraq have been quite quiet. And so what undoubtedly happened here is Iran felt that they had been humiliated and they had to respond in some way, knowing that Israel was going to come back and take retribution. So the Iranians are probably preparing for that. I think what's interesting here is what Martha alluded to, and that is that the Israelis have discussed that this retribution will be against economic targets. When you hear that, and you hear it in reference to Iran, think oil. So the lifeblood of the Iranian economy, the lifeblood of the Iranian government, of the regime, is based on oil money. Who's the biggest consumer of that oil? China. So we're looking to, this is going to become a global issue here if the Israelis do, in fact, go after places like Karg Island, which is the major oil transshipment point for Iranian oil, or someplace around the Strait of Hormuz where all of that oil, not just from Iran, but from all the Gulf states transit. So keep an eye on oil markets here because they don't like things to be unsettled. And if they can't get the oil that comes from the Persian Gulf countries out of the Persian Gulf countries through the shipborne means, then this is going to have a global effect on economies as well.
Steve Ganyard, thank you. And if you are just tuning in right now, you are watching breaking news here on ABC. Iran firing missiles into Israel at this hour. Residents told to remain close to bomb shelters. As you can hear the air raids and the sirens, the air raid sirens sounding across the country right now. And as we are watching these live pictures, and there in Tel Aviv is our Matt Gutman, also our Ian Panel in Beirut, our Steve Ganyard also with us from the military and security side of things. As we watch this overseas, there are concerns here at home. Enhanced security already taking place, we know, in New York City. Our Aaron Katursky has been talking with his sources here back in the U.S. What do we know, Aaron, as soon as it was announced that indeed Iran has started its two-wave attack here. The first one already in order. The second one, we are waiting. 4 targets in Israel now of concern. What are the domestic concerns now, particularly in New York, as you are talking with law enforcement at this hour?
Jewish high holidays, Kira, and law enforcement officials had been monitoring developments in the Mideast for this very kind of retaliatory attack that now appears to be taking place across the skies of Israel. So far, we have heard of no specific threats to the U.S. homeland. Law enforcement has been anticipating something like this and deploying to sensitive Jewish locations in advance of the high holidays and in advance of the October 7th anniversary. Kira, it's important to say the NYPD is meeting right now to decide whether they need to do any additional deployments around New York City, but they have been on this kind of alert level for weeks now because of what's been happening overseas and the concerns that it brings at home. In particular, they've been paying attention to what Matt Gutman's been reporting about some kind of an attack with a number of casualties coming outside of a subway system and maybe onto a bus. So the police here in this country are paying particular attention for any kind of copycats, Kira.
Steve Ganyard, let me take that to you. Firsthand experience. If we think of attacks that have happened across the country, there always is a fear back here at home that citizens of the United States will be targeted as well. Since the Hamas attacks in Israel, we have been on high alert here in the United States over the past year. Your thoughts as New York is already responding with regard to security? Could we start to see this, say, at synagogues across the U.S.? As Aaron mentions, the high holiday. We're coming up on 1 year since the October 7th attack, and now Iran launching one of what we are told will be 2 waves of attacks into Israel.
Yeah, I think times have changed, and the number of terrorist groups that were striking around the world, this kind of global effort has diminished over time. And really, what we're seeing now is this is Israel against Iran. And so, in the past, the Iranians have been supportive of attacks against U.S. troops with the Quds Force and their IRGC, but they also know that President Biden has put them on notice that if they come after the U.S., that the U.S. will come back at them. So the Iranians had benefited in the past of having these proxies, these cutouts, these, look at Hamas. It's a Sunni organization supporting a Shia state. And so it's the enemy of my enemy makes strange bedfellows, but it doesn't mean that the Iranians have wide networks that are going to be capable or willing to make attacks directly within the U.S. homeland or on U.S. forces. Doesn't mean something like that won't happen. It's just less likely here now that this is sort of a direct confrontation with the Iranian regime rather than a broader Islamic effort against Western targets that we had seen in the past.
And the question remains, as we continue to hear the air raid sirens, what exactly is Israel going to do next? Avi Melamed, former Israeli intelligence analyst, on the phone with me now. Avi, as you are watching these live pictures and following now what Iran says is, or what Israel has now confirmed as Iran firing these missiles into Israel, residents told to shelter in place. How do you see this unfolding?
Well, Kira, thank you for having me. I think that we should expect a massive Israeli retaliation in a volume and scale that the Mullah regime in Tehran has not experienced yet. The Mullah regime has conducted sort of an act of despair, trying to stop the avalanche of its proxies following the major blows that Hezbollah, the major proxy of the Iranians, sustained in the last couple of weeks. It may be counterproductive because the Israeli expected counter-retaliation to the attack on Israel may result in a very dire situation for the Mullah regime.
I think we lost contact with Avi. We will try to bring him back into the conversation. Ian, panel, let me take it back to you in Beirut. Are we hearing anything on behalf of Iran?
Yeah, in fact, we've had a couple of statements in the last hour or so. First of all, the Iranians released still images, photos of some of those missiles being launched. They were sent to a semi-official state news agency. First statement comes from the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Command. It says that the operation was conducted based on a decision made in the Supreme National Security Council and with the support of the army. It says that the attacks were partly in retaliation for the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. You remember that happened earlier this year. He, of course, was the leader of Hamas, as well as Hassan Nasrallah, who, of course, was the leader of Hezbollah. It says that the order was given by the Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. Also a statement from the Iranian mission. This is at the United Nations, where you are in New York, saying Iran's legal, rational and legitimate response to the terrorist acts of the Zionist regime, this is what the Iranians say, has been duly carried out. They then go on to warn Israel, should Israel carry out any kind of response or commit further acts of malevolence, a subsequent and crushing response will ensue. They're also warning other countries who are allied with Israel to not side with them and to distance themselves. So they're certainly feeling very emboldened by this. You know, we have colleagues in Iraq right now, colleagues in Jordan, and they're all seeing the same thing. They're seeing these missiles flying over. This cuts to a lot of the divisions throughout this region between Shia and Sunni world, and it forces people to pick sides. And that's why it's also, I think, kind of a very dangerous situation. Iran now warning Israel not to respond. Israel almost certainly will respond. So does that then lead to a ratcheting up, which is the very thing that President Biden has been at pains to say repeatedly he wants to avoid? This is what American diplomacy has been directed towards. This is why Antony Blinken's been constantly shuttling backwards and forwards to try and calm the mood. But frankly, that diplomacy has failed. Calmer voices have not prevailed. And certainly right now, we're looking at a devastating night for Israel. Here in Lebanon, the attacks continue. Nearly 1 million people forced from their homes. This has been a terrible 2 weeks for Lebanon. The situation we know in Gaza has been absolutely awful. You've also got the West Bank, and now the possibility that it then spreads to Iran. So I think we're in a very, very dangerous moment for the Middle East, and it will affect America, it will affect Europe, and most of all, it's going to affect the people who live here, who don't really get a say in the decisions of their political and military masters. Kira?
Ian, thank you. Let's take it back to you, Avi, playing off exactly what Ian Panel is talking about here, and that is, what would this retaliation look like? You say it will be massive. If we think back to July, when Hamas's political leader was taken out by an Israeli drone in Tehran, in country, right there in Iran, what does that say about Israel, its capabilities, and what it's willing to do within what you describe as a massive Israeli retaliation? How deep into Iran will Israel go, and how will they do it, Avi?
Well, Kira, as you may recall, the previous attack, the Iran attacked Israel in April 13, 14, there was a symbolic Israeli retaliation. Reportedly, Israeli jets targeted a specific location next to, deep in the area of Iran, and the area of Natanz, which is one of their major facilities. So in the last couple of months since then, we have witnessed more than time the ability of Israel to strike hard thousands of miles away from the state of Israel. The most recent attack was on the Hodeidah port in Yemen and other locations in Yemen, some 1,200 miles away from Israel. So in that regard, we do have some good glimpse, so to speak, in understanding what Israel can do. And I would expect that there will be maybe a combined Israeli retaliation, basically. But as I said before, I would expect a massive Israeli retaliation.
And how soon do you see that happening, Avi? What exactly is Prime Minister Netanyahu waiting for here? What is he watching? What is he talking about with his military leaders? How is he plotting his retaliation at this moment?
I think that the retaliation is imminent. We should expect it in a very short period of time. I don't think this is something that is going to continue for a long period of time, and I think it will happen soon.
And at what point does Netanyahu pull back? How far does he go? How deep does this go? How long does this go, Avi?
Well, look, we have to look at the wider context. Israel has been threatened, and other states in the region has been threatened by Iran and their proxies, the axis of resistance, for the last 40 years. This is a moment of truth to the region. This is a moment of truth to the international community. What the Syria will understand today is, unfortunately, the bitter fruits of many years of rapprochement and policy conducted by Western powers that basically came to terms with the Iranian growing threat. And this was inevitable, and this is, in the end of the day, it's just happening, unfolding in front of our eyes. We are in a very pivotal moment, and I personally believe that we could exit this pivotal moment into a better environment and future for the people of the region. But that calls for ending once and for all the Iranian threat, or the Iranian regime ability to continue and to dictate its radical agenda and terrorizing the Middle East. This is the moment of truth. We have reached this moment.
Avi, let me ask you, as a former Israeli intelligence analyst that knows firsthand how an operation like this on behalf of Israel would go down, will go down. As you know, our president here, President Joe Biden, has been calling for a ceasefire, has been trying to broker a ceasefire, has been calling for peace in the Middle East. I'm going to ask you a very direct question right now. Is that, at this point, seeing what we're seeing right now, is that even an option? Is that even possible at this point? Or is a ceasefire just completely off the table right now?
No, I think that at this point, the ceasefire is off the table right now. We are now in the big game, the direct Israeli-Iranian collision, a scenario that I was predicting accurately in the past in my recent book, Inside the Middle East, that was published in 2022. We are exactly in this place. This is the time for the big game. This is the time to make the big decisions. There is no more room for avoiding the confrontation. The time has come.
Avi, thank you. Let's take it straight to the White House. Our Mary Bruce standing by, Chief White House Correspondent, just listening to what Avi just said. Mary, you know, what does President Biden do at this moment?
Well, what I can tell you is what he is actually physically doing at this moment, and that is monitoring this unfolding from the Situation Room. He is there with Vice President Harris. We just received that information from the White House. He's receiving regular updates, of course, from his national security team. But also this, Kira, the White House saying the president has directed the U.S. military to aid Israel's defense against Iranian attacks and to shoot down missiles that are targeting Israel. Of course, we have heard from a White House official earlier today saying that a direct military attack from Iran against Israel will carry severe consequences for Iran. What exactly that looks like, we still do not know. And as you were just discussing, of course, the president in the days leading up to this has been calling for a ceasefire, saying that while an all-out war is possible, the president was adamant we really have to avoid it. Of course, that is a hard sentiment to see how that is possible, given what we are seeing play out right now, Kira.
Steve Ganyard, what could the consequences be for Iran?
Well, Kara, I think that the White House has said that the Israelis have at least relayed to them that there will be economic targets. Remember that the real threat to Israel is the Iranian nuclear program, and that has been developing, and the ability for the Iranians to create what's called a breakout capability to be able to build a nuclear weapon in a short period of time is very close and very near at hand. You're seeing these ballistic missiles tonight raining down on Israel that theoretically could be the same kind of ballistic missiles that could carry one of those nuclear warheads. So as Avi was noting, at some point, this is going to have to come to a head, at least in the eyes of the Israeli government and the Israeli military, that they cannot continue to allow Iran to develop a nuclear weapon capability that would directly threaten Israel in the future. So there may be some attempts to go after some of the nuclear programs within Iran. The problem for Israel is that most of these nuclear programs and their centrifuges are buried very deeply. Israel does not have heavy bombers to carry deep penetrating warheads or the kinds of munitions that would be able to take out those nuclear facilities. So they can take out things around those nuclear facilities. They can take out the oil capabilities that the Iranian economy relies on. They can take out various parts of the regime. They can go after Khamenei himself. But the ability to take care of the real problem, which is nuclear weapons, is going to be quite a challenge for the Israeli military.
You mentioned Khamenei. I mean, is there a scenario here where Israel strikes the leadership of Iran before anything else, or does this go in phases? Does this start by taking down all communications, power plants, just daily functions for the country to run? Or is there a possibility here, depending on what happens inside Israel, that Israel may retaliate and go right for leadership?
Well, remember that they went after Nasrallah, and lots of people didn't think they were going to go after Nasrallah. So Khamenei apparently, right after Nasrallah was killed, went into hiding. And so Israel's ability to track senior leaders in Iran is not as good as it is to track Hezbollah leaders in Lebanon, which is right next door. So they would have the problem actually finding where he was. Remember that the distance between Iran and Israel is significant. It's the same distance as between Houston and Los Angeles. So the ability to fly airplanes and to be able to take real-time targeting is not the same as in Lebanon. So the challenge for the Israeli military is much greater in Iran. I do think, though, that what you're going to see is something where the Israelis are going to take their time. There's no need for them to rush. They can assess the damage, take care of what's going on. They still have a campaign going on in both Gaza and Lebanon. There's no rush on what they need to do in terms of retaliation. There will probably be discussions with allies, to include the United States, to make sure that the response does not go beyond the Iranian borders. But again, I think that there are all sorts of options, because the Iranian defenses are essentially helpless in the face of the kinds of military capabilities that the Iranians have, or the Israelis have.
Our Martha Raddatz, Chief Global Affairs Correspondent, on the phone with us now. Martha, we were just talking about Iran, how deep Israel could strike. What would be the plan, short-term, long-term, or is it an immediate action going straight toward the country's leader? We were talking about Khamenei in hiding. You have been to Iran several times. What are your thoughts as you are watching these live pictures? Does Khamenei continue to hide? Is he in any way carrying out instructions? What are your thoughts at this moment as we are watching just an unprecedented time right now, with fears of escalation, a wider war, and tremendous risk for both countries?
Well, Kira, I think being in hiding for Khamenei and many senior leaders is wise at this point. They have been watching what's happened with Hezbollah and Hamas and seeing what is happening. So we were told as of yesterday by a senior official that many of those leaders were already in hiding. I think they likely knew what was coming, certainly on their part, and they likely know what is coming now, so that will probably continue. Iran, as Steve rightly pointed out, doesn't really have the defense systems in place, and depending on what the Israelis try to strike, that will make a huge difference in, perhaps we'll see another Iranian response. But right now, they know Hezbollah was vulnerable. Iran wanted their other proxy group, Houthis, to try and hit Israel. It didn't really work, and I think that's one of the reasons of the many that Iran finally carried out these strikes themselves. And again, more waves are expected. They don't believe this first wave of strikes will end it. And you've also seen, and over the weekend, we talked to U.S. officials, and John Kirby in particular, about the United States wanting to de-escalate this situation, but we certainly have not seen that. I did ask John Kirby, who is the White House spokesman for national security, as you know, what he thought about them continuing the fight against Hezbollah and continuing to go after leaders and this ground incursion. And he said, we think they can de-escalate and go after Hezbollah all at the same time, because clearly Israel continuing the fight against Hezbollah felt that Hezbollah, and it certainly is vulnerable, that they should basically get them while they're down and take care of this. And again, this is retaliation for that. It's retaliation against Hamas, but they did get pressure from their proxies to do this kind of strike. And depending on the damage, that's when we will see how Israel will respond to this, but they will 100% respond to this. And not only if the missiles are intercepted, if all the missiles are intercepted, it's also just the shrapnel from interceptions that can cause damage. As I was saying earlier, I was just in Israel last week for about 10 days, and the atmosphere in Tel Aviv, there are thousands of people out on the street, and they haven't seen this intensity for a very long time. And the missile strikes, I was also there right after October 7th, and the air raids were constant. And today it has to be bringing them back to that moment there in Tel Aviv.
Martha, thank you. Let's get straight back to Tel Aviv. Our Matt Gutman, where the spokesperson for the IDF just put out a statement. Matt, what do we know?
Just a few moments ago, Kira, Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari, who's the chief spokesman for the IDF, as you just mentioned, went on TV, a national broadcast, announcing that for now, there is this all clear, telling people they can sort of begin moving out of those bomb shelters. He told them to stay close. He also said that some of those missiles apparently hit installations. We do not know, and he said they are not aware of any casualties at this point. That does not mean that there aren't casualties at this point. The one thing that he certified, and Martha just said it, is that there will be a response, that Israel has a plan. And typically what has been happening in the previous attacks, like the one against Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah in Lebanon, last week, the IDF presents a series of options to the government. The cabinet sits over it, and then they decide what to do. That's what also happened with last night's incursion into Lebanon. So the plans are on the table. The question is, how far does the Israeli government want to take this? Just yesterday, Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke publicly in English, directing his comments to the Iranian people, saying that the regime could fall soon. And so one of the things that we've begun to hear from Israeli analysts at this point is a call for a strike on the Bandar Abbas oil port and terminal on the Persian Gulf in Iran. It's a huge terminal that controls much of the oil that goes into that country and out of that country. And if that is hit, that would cause catastrophic economic damage to Iran. And analysts are telling me it could possibly topple the regime. That's how significant it could be. That would be a major strike. They're also talking about attacking other possible energy installations as well. Again, this is a cabinet decision, as Steve said, and Martha as well. It does not have to be decided immediately. After the last round of missiles hit, Israel took a number of days, even longer, to retaliate. And then it was a very restrained response, essentially firing a missile from an airplane against an Iranian radar base, sending the message that Israel can hit whatever it wants, whenever it wants, without being detected. We know that it's not going to be that restrained this time, despite U.S. efforts and the Biden administration's incredibly energetic efforts in recent months to try to tamp down the tenor of the violence here. It's not going to be the case this time. A major question, though, is whether the U.S. assists in any attack on Iran at this point, and what kind of assistance that might be if it does happen. But clearly, the reprisals on the table. One more thing that Martha just mentioned. When you have that many missiles coming in, and we just had additional interceptors in Jerusalem a few minutes ago, it's not just the missiles that are being blown out of the sky, it's the interceptors that are exploding to hit them, causing a tremendous amount of shrapnel. And having been just north of Gaza when some of those rockets fired from Hamas were coming down and were intercepted, it's one of the eeriest experiences, because you can hear the tinkle of falling shrapnel and metal on the rooftops as it's coming down. But now we're talking about bus-length missiles, and when they come down, it can create a significant amount of damage, even if high explosives don't detonate anywhere. So everybody here is still assessing. They're bracing for another possible wave, which we're told might happen. But right now, most importantly, we're hearing that the IDF, at least, is not aware of any casualties, Kira.
All right, so put this in perspective, just backing up to what you said at the very beginning about the IDF spokesperson saying that he's giving the all clear. It's okay to move out of shelters. However, a response is coming. Yep. What does that tell you? I even am looking at you. You now have your helmet off, and it seems that it's taken a little bit of a pause, I guess, with regard to immediacy, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, I'll have Nikki, our cameraman, turn the camera and show you that traffic, if he can make it past our producer, Hugo, traffic is picking up. We haven't seen that in recent hours. There's a trickle of cars. People are starting to move about. Maybe they were cornered or stuck someplace, and now they're trying to get back home. Obviously, life is not returning to normal. Tel Aviv at this time of night is, as Martha mentioned, incredibly vibrant, even on a weekday. That is not the case now. And typically on a day like today, Kira, most people would be going to their families for the holiday, for the Jewish New Year. That's not happening right now, but people are starting to move around. You can see that there's a bit more confidence. Regarding the plan for the next attack, we don't know. And it could take days. It could even take longer. It depends how clear of a message and how big of a response there is. And a lot of it does depend on what kind of damage was caused by those missiles and those interceptors. But I can tell you one thing that has not happened, that I have not experienced in 25 years of covering this region. I've never seen a time when the major headquarters of the IDF in central Tel Aviv was evacuated. The major base for all of the intelligence, for Israel's version of the NSA, for the Mossad, for military intelligence north of Tel Aviv, was evacuated. Other bases around the country were. That is incredibly unusual. I think the only time that may have happened in the past was in 1991 when Iraq was firing Scud missiles. So this is a very unusual and uncommon event tonight. And you can tell the enormity of it by the Israeli preparation for this missile salvo. And of course, it's not yet over. So the next few hours are going to be very, very tense here as they wait for a possible second wave. We don't know if there is going to be one, though, Kira.
So bottom line, Matt, the Israel's Iron Dome has done its job thus far.
There's this three-layered system of anti-missile defense. It's the Iron Dome for more closer-range missiles. It's the Arrow and David Sling. It's this trio that works on different levels of the atmosphere, and they seem to have worked very well. But we've seen these videos, and I don't know if you've seen them coming in or if you're broadcasting them over me, but of massive amounts, swarms of missiles coming in, and it looks like some of them are making impact. It's unclear how many have landed, but we do know that those interceptors to try to knock those missiles out of the sky also went up in unprecedented numbers to try to eliminate that missile threat. Again, everybody's still in assessment mode here in Israel, Kira.
Matt, thank you. And Steve, drawing what Matt just said about what could be the next phase here, or what exactly will Israel do as it sits back, waits, plans what its retaliation will look like. And you mentioned this early on about oil and oil installations and targeting that versus the death of the supreme leader. How do you see this playing out? Do you see more of Israel going toward that type of strategy, just taking out Iran's economy capability to get by day to day, the money flow, the oil flow, versus rolling in hot and going for the supreme leader?
It'll probably be a combination of all of the above, Kara, because the Iranian economy and the Iranian government relies for about 40% of its income from oil. So you shut off that income, and things like basic services begin to go away, which will not make the Iranian people happy, which may be what Netanyahu is alluding to in terms of sort of fomenting an internal dissent that he thinks is closer to the surface than may appear. But I do think that it will be something that will be done with a combination of ideas. In other words, do you go after both the strategic leadership? Do you go after the economy? Do you go after the nuclear facilities? There are only a certain number of aircraft that can do that. The Israelis do not have the number of aerial tankers that the U.S. does, so they can't project power in the same mass that they can into Lebanon. But I do want to pick up on something that Matt said a couple minutes ago, and about the number of these incoming. So if you remember back in April, the Iranians were essentially humiliated in that the Israelis knocked down 99% of all the incoming weapons in that attack. They learned from that attack. I was just looking at one social video that's up on social media, and it shows I counted 25 impacts somewhere in Israel within 1 second. And so what the Iranians learned was that they had to overwhelm the Israeli defenses by launching all of these ballistic missiles at the same time. So that's what they learned from April, and it looks like that they succeeded, and many of these missiles may have gotten through. Don't know what that looks like. Now, we have been covering the ground war in Gaza, the ground war in Lebanon. Those wars are very infantry-centric. What goes on in terms of missile defense is something that you would see out of a movie. It's usually controlled in a big room, in a dark room with lots of screens. You have all sorts of radar feeding in data. You have multiple systems, as Matt alluded to. There's a three-tiered missile defense system within Israel. All of those computers, all of those inputs, all those radar inputs are being fused at one point. The computer is actually making the decision on when to fire on which targets automatically. So things are having to happen so quickly that it's really that the computers themselves are the ones that are defending Israel. And sometimes it's going to involve using U.S. ships. That may require voice communications, but this is all data link. It's all zeros and ones, and it's a very, very different war than what we see on the ground in Gaza or on the ground in Lebanon.
And again, how do you see the U.S. at this point playing a role? We already know that additional troops have been sent into the region. We know we have U.S. ships and capabilities out in the waterways. At what point does the U.S., I guess, pick up its role?
Here we're in election year. We're a month and a half out from a very tight election. I highly doubt that the Biden administration wants to involve U.S. personnel in a shooting match with Iran at this point. It doesn't mean that the U.S. won't defend Israel, won't do anything that Iran won't defend anything that Iran does in terms of follow-on attack. But I highly doubt that the U.S. is going to get itself involved in direct attacks against Iran. I even highly doubt that they'll do things like provide tanker support to the Israelis just because they don't want to do anything to upset domestic politics. But again, the Israelis have the capability to do most of what needs to be done. They'll take their time, they'll pick their targets, and they'll have some sort of a strategy. But there certainly will be something, and it's going to be a news story leading all the way up to the U.S. elections.
It's going to be a volatile time for sure. Just a little bit more than a month away, Steve. Let's take it back to our Ian panel, who's in Beirut. Iran now officially taking responsibility for these attacks. Ian, what more are we hearing from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard?
Yeah, I mean, no surprise, right? We knew that this was going to be coming from Iran. We had some questions, I think, for a number of days, especially after the assassination of Nasrallah, whether or not Iran would respond or whether it was afraid of the consequences. Well, they've certainly made their response very loud and clear. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps issuing a statement, as you say, saying that they were the ones who carried out this attack. They say that they targeted security and military targets. Also, the Iranian mission to the United Nations also issuing a statement saying that the attacks are a legal, rational, and a legitimate response to Israel's attacks. And when they say Israel's attacks, they obviously mean Israel's attacks on its allies, the proxies, Hezbollah here, Hamas elsewhere, also the Houthis in Yemen. So there was some sense that this was coming. They are also issuing very strong warnings, cognizant of the risks that Israel is going to respond to, the very high risk that Israel is going to respond, warning them of devastating consequences if they do. And I think this is what's preying on everyone's minds right now. As Matt said, we don't know if there's another wave coming. Some of the statements seem to suggest that maybe that was the response. But we'll just have to wait and see, and the Israeli authorities will update us on that. But Daniel Hagari, the IDF spokesman, essentially saying that for now all things are clear for Israelis to go back out onto the streets. But yes, there are real concerns that, you know, if there is another wave, then there's a response, then there's a further retaliation, and every time this gets ratcheted up. Just to echo what Steve was talking about a minute ago, the United States, the Pentagon, has said that the U.S. was involved in intercepting some of those Iranian missiles. So, yes, defending Israel, but again, I think getting involved in anything larger than that, I think that's probably unthinkable at the moment. Israel has already laid out a broad spectrum of potential responses, you know, from cyber attacks to physical attacks to maybe targeting specific individuals. They've been ready for this for a long time. They've been planning for this for a long time, and Israel has incredible intelligence in Iran. Logistically, it's very difficult, as Steve said, because it is so far away. It's not like launching attacks here in Lebanon and in Beirut or just across the border. That's very close and much easier for Israel to do. You need a lot of assets to kind of travel further and strike further. But nevertheless, they obviously feel that they do have a plan in place. I think there's absolutely no pressure on Israel. They can choose when they want to respond. Remember, we had that curious statement from Benjamin Netanyahu in this video address to the Iranian people just yesterday, where he talked about that they would be free sooner than they expected. Very curious choice of words, and telling the Iranian people, Persian people, as he called them, that there was a kinship between them and the Jewish people. But it was a clear threat to the Iranian leadership that change was coming. I think Israel thinks that Iran is a very brittle society. Economically, it's pretty devastated. Politically, any challenge to the regime, whether it's come from women protesting or it's come from more other kind of political parties, has been crushed by the regime. People suffer in Iran, without a doubt, and I think Israel's assessment is that that can be unpicked quite easily. I don't know that that's true, because Iran, like a lot of other authoritarian regimes, has been very successful about controlling its population. But if Israel goes after its economic assets, if it goes after its key leadership, if it disrupts the ability to conduct command and control, as it did with Hezbollah here, it was astonishing how quickly you could see an organization that looked almost unassailable unravel just in a matter of weeks. They had astonishing intelligence here. They are believed to have astonishing intelligence in Iran as well. It's just with Hamas in Gaza, that's where Israeli intelligence failed. But we're just going to have to wait and see what the fallout is, see if there are any casualties, what the impact has been of these strikes, and then hear from the Israelis about what their response is.
Ian, thank you. And the IDF spokesman, Daniel Hagari, just saying moments ago, there have been many interceptions, some impacts in central Israel and other areas. There will be consequences, and we have a plan. That's coming from the chief spokesperson for the IDF, Daniel Hagari. As Ian was saying, Israel definitely has a chance on how to respond to Iran's attacks, but everyday families cannot. Our Martha Redditz has been talking to a number of those in Jerusalem, particularly those in families that have been in the shelters as we've been watching all of this fallout there in Israel. Martha, what are family members telling you at this hour?
You know, Kira, you have talked to me and Matt and Ian, and we are all used to being in areas like this and covering wars. But I know a young family, a young diplomatic family who just arrived in Jerusalem several weeks ago, and she texted me and said, "This is just intense." My husband said, "Incoming for real," and we scurried. We couldn't see anything because we were in our shelter. I made it a space room with a light that makes the ceiling different colors and stars, and put the kids' favorite movies on their iPads, but we could hear the sirens so loudly, and then the interception booms doing their amazing work. It's wild to plan for this. prepped for this know this can and could happen. But when we're on the floor holding the kids while the booms go off, it is a different perspective. That is a young American family who said, we just got the all clear, thankfully, so we can leave now.
Martha, thank you.
To hear that perspective and realize that you can look at those interceptions, you can know what those missiles mean and where they can hit, but being with your scared little kids is a whole different perspective.
And it seems that this has become a part of their lives, particularly in the past year. Martha, there in Jerusalem. Martha, thank you. Let's take it back to our Matt Gutman. Matt, we are now in wait-and-see mode.
We are, and you can see the flak jacket's off, the helmet's gone. Israel has announced the all clear. We understand that there have been over 150, possibly 180 missiles that were fired. Traffic is going again, but the damage is still being assessed, and we're seeing these videos that are coming in, Kira, and they show that there were some installations that were hit. Also, not military installations. This is still unverified, but some of the videos we're seeing are very, very dramatic in terms of the destruction caused by some of these missiles. As Steve mentioned earlier, they can cause catastrophic damage, even if pieces of them fall, not only because of high explosives in them, but also because of the momentum they're carrying and the speed that they're traveling. Again, Israel is now bracing for the next round. Ian mentioned it also, this retaliatory cycle. It appears that that is where we are headed next. The big decision right now, Kira, is with the Israeli cabinet. They are going to get a series, a menu of possible strike options against Iran in the coming hours and day or so. And at some point in the near future, I'm told, they're going to make a decision. We don't yet know what that will be. And we don't yet know how severe of a blow they want to level at the Iranian regime right now. But this was unprecedented, significantly more damage, significantly more missiles than we saw in the previous salvo in April, Kira.
And just as we are now in this wait-and-see mode, the options, Matt, that Israel has on the table, well, they have a lot of options, clearly. The question is, how much of a wider war could this turn into? The risks, the circumstances right now. Will Israel decide to hit those oil installations? Will Israel decide to hit infrastructure and all the surrounding ways that Iran survives and makes money? Or will Israel decide to go straight toward leadership and possibly Iran's supreme leader?
Unclear what they'll do. What we do know is that Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu, who has essentially been in power on and off for the past 15 years and in some control of the government for nearly 20 years, really since 1996, has had Iran in his sights since the start. He considers Iran enemy number one for Israel, not Hamas, not Hezbollah. Iran is the head of the snake, according to Netanyahu. He has been waiting for something like this, and to some degree, there are members of the Israeli cabinet and the government who see this as an opportunity to try to topple the Iranian regime, which has bedeviled them for so many years. They've tried to stop the development of the Iranian nuclear program. They haven't been able to do it. They may see this as their opportunity, but as Steve and others have mentioned, it's a long way from Tel Aviv to Tehran. Yes, Israel has demonstrated an incredible capacity to strike abroad, but Iran is much farther, much more complicated, and their nuclear facilities are much deeper and more entrenched, Kira.
Iran now launching a retaliatory missile attack targeting Israel. Right now, things seem to have calmed down. We are in a wait-and-see mode. Life for those in Israel, they've been told they can leave the shelters, but things can change at a moment's notice. We will wait to see what happens next. Our coverage continues on ABC News Live and abcnews.com. David Muir will be here with a complete wrap-up on World News Tonight, followed by live coverage of the vice presidential debate beginning at 8 Eastern. I'm Kira Phillips. Thank you for joining us for our special coverage as we continue to see what the fallout will be after Iran launching these missile attacks targeting Israel. We take you now to your regular programming.
This has been a special report from ABC News. Whenever news breaks,
we are here in Israel, a nation at war.
In Rolling Fork, this tornado tore through this town.
From Lewiston, Maine.
The scene of a horrific mass shooting.
From the scene of that deadly missile strike.
ABC News Live everywhere.
In Iceland, let's go.
On the 2024 campaign trail.
Here at 10 Downing Street.
Wherever the story is.
We're going to take you there.
You're streaming ABC News Live.
ABC News Live.
You're streaming ABC News Live.
ABC News Live, streaming free everywhere. What does it take to be the most watched newscast in America?
We are part of an operation.
Is this our Combat Operations Center?
We're approaching the gate. Militants came in from...
Hi. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Ismail? David.
ABC's World News Tonight with David Muir is America's most watched newscast.
The new season of The Old Man is an excellent thriller.
Things are about to get serious.
Compelling, entertaining, and incredibly tense ride.
You aren't going to see it coming.
FX's The Old Man. All new Thursdays at 10 on FX. Stream on Hulu.
One great idea can change your life.
That's the American dream right there.
I want to be on a team with you.
Emmy-winning Shark Tank season premiere October 18th on ABC and stream on Hulu.
Harris Walls, Trump Vance. Now tonight. With just weeks to go until Election Day, the vice presidential candidates face each other and face off. Tim Walz, J.D. Vance, the vice presidential debate. The night starts at 8 p.m. Eastern, live with the ABC News event special, The Race for the White House, with David Muir and the ABC News Powerhouse political team. Tonight, starting at 8 p.m. Eastern on ABC.
Reporting from the 2024 campaign trail, I'm Eva Pilgrim. Wherever the story is, we'll take you there. You're streaming ABC News Live.
Harris Walls, Trump Vance. Now tonight. With just weeks to go until Election Day, the vice presidential candidates face each other and face off. Tim Walz, J.D. Vance, the vice presidential debate. The night starts at 8 p.m. Eastern, live with the ABC News event special, The Race for the White House, with David Muir and the ABC News Powerhouse political team. Tonight, starting at 8 p.m. Eastern on ABC.
Amanda Riley was a mother, wife.
Everybody loved her.
I heard the words, "You have stage 3 blood cancer."
We gave our hearts, our prayers.
We thought she was God's gift, but she was a liar.
Why would somebody fake cancer?
There's all these pictures of her in the hospital with IVs, tubing. It was only a matter of time until Amanda's whole world came tumbling down.
Oh my God!
Scamanda premieres next Wednesday on ABC and stream on Hulu.
And good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kira Phillips. We continue our breaking news coverage now. Iran launching a barrage of missiles at Israel. Air raid sirens blaring around Tel Aviv as the rockets lit up the night sky. A senior official telling ABC News that Israel is expecting a total of 240 to 250 missiles from Iran. Also, that those missiles are expected to come in 2 waves, hitting multiple targets. Israel says there will be consequences, and it indeed has a plan to retaliate. The White House saying that President Biden and Vice President Harris are in the Situation Room monitoring the attack. The president has directed the U.S. military to aid Israel's defense against Iran's attacks, and even one U.S. official saying that American forces have intercepted Iranian missiles. The IDF saying it appears the rockets have stopped flying for now, and it is telling residents they can leave their protected spaces. Israeli police say that 6 people were also killed in a terror shooting attack in Tel Aviv. We do have team coverage for you, starting off with our chief national correspondent, Matt Gutman in Tel Aviv. Matt, just bring us up to date this hour with regard to where we stand, as we are sort of in a wait-and-see mode, and that is waiting to see what exactly Israel is going to do next.
But we know the first stage is over, Kira. Israel has just announced through its chief military spokesman, Daniel Hagari, that this round is over. They do not expect additional missiles to be fired. About 180 missiles fired, according to the IDF. The vast majority of them appear to have been intercepted by Israel's very sophisticated air defense system, including these anti-missile missiles that we've been watching go up and hit those missiles in midair. But it does appear to be over. Traffic is moving again. People are starting to go about. The question is, what happens next, as you just posed? And we don't know. I don't think the Israeli cabinet knows. What we do understand is that typically how this would function, and we know that plans are already being presented to the Israeli government, is that they're going to offer a menu of options from the military. You can do this, this, or this. And it really depends on how severe of a blow the Israeli government wants to take against the Iranian regime right now. Just yesterday, Kira, if you'll recall, Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu, in English, addressed the people of Iran directly, saying that your regime might be toppled soon, that we don't have a fight with the people of Iran, we have a problem with the regime in Iran. And it really, this is the question right now, how far do they want to take it? One thing is clear, though, the damage is not as extensive as some people had feared. I just got a text message from an analyst said, yes, some of those missiles managed to penetrate Israel's air defenses and hit military bases and apparently some civilian areas as well. But so far, we understand that there have been no casualties, at least that the IDF is aware of, and that is a big deal. The more severe the casualties, the more severe the damage against sensitive military installations, the more ferocious the response. And so the less severe this kind of damage, the more restraint Israel might be able to show. And you can rest assured the Biden administration is going to try to pressure Israel to hold back as much as it can. It does not want a massive regional war right now in the Middle East, Kira.
I don't think anybody wants a massive regional war, that's for sure. And Matt, while I have you, I mean, you mentioned regime change. Are we getting ahead of ourselves to even start to have that conversation?
I think so. Let's see what the next response is. I think the concern is that there might be a retaliatory cycle. What we do know, and what Israel's chief military spokesman has just said, is that there will be a response, and it will be severe, right? This is not going to be what happened in April after Israel got about 120 missiles fired from Iran, including about 200 drones and cruise missiles. They managed to knock most of them out of the sky. There is much more damage this time. There is a larger number of missiles, and Israel is taking this more seriously. It responded that time largely due to U.S. pressure with a single missile strike against an Iranian radar installation, essentially showing Iran, hey, we can hit you at your most sensitive installation without you even knowing it. And clearly, Israel has penetrated the Iranian regime with its intelligence apparatus. The Mossad has incredible assets in Iran, as we saw with the assassination of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh a couple of months ago in the Iranian Revolutionary Guard guest house, like the Holy of Holies. So if they can penetrate there, they can get anyone. The question is, do they want to do it? And how much of an international outcry is Israel willing to withstand to try to topple the regime? One thing that I am hearing quite a bit at this point from analysts is that Israel might go after Iran's energy infrastructure, possibly something like the Bandar Abbas port. That's where a lot of the oil comes in and out on the Persian Gulf. And taking out a major oil port and terminal could have a significant impact on the Iranian economy, which largely relies on oil to sustain itself. So that's something that is a possibility, Kira.
Matt, thank you. Let's take it now to our Ian panel. He's in Beirut, our chief foreign correspondent. Ian, just to play off of what Matt was just saying, it seems that, of course, this is becoming more political, no surprise. There are members of Congress, senators, and others now taking to social media platforms. And it seems there seems to be a group of leaders now rallying behind this idea to urge President Biden to strike those oil refineries. Just one a tweet that came out from Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina saying this is a moment of choosing for the free world regarding Iran, the Ayatollah and Iranian regime and religious Nazis who want to destroy the state of Israel. Their words, not mine. They want to purify Islam and attack the United States. Again, their words, not mine. The missile attack against Israel should be the breaking point, and I would urge the Biden administration to coordinate an overwhelming response with Israel, starting with Iran's ability to refine oil. These oil refineries need to be hit and hit hard because that is the source of cash for this regime to perpetrate their terror. My prayers are with the people of Israel, and may God continue to bless Israel. Your thoughts, Ian, as we watched these strikes unfold. Iran saying there will be 2 waves of missile strikes into Israel. That first wave has seemed to calm down. Now it's a wait-and-see scenario of what that second wave will look like and what exactly Israel will do. Your thoughts on this urging of the president here in the United States to strike those oil refineries?
I mean, this becoming political is the last thing that's probably needed. At the very least, this should be handled by the diplomats, but I think, unfortunately, it's going to be handled by military leaders, at least for the foreseeable future. But for this then to become an issue in the presidential election campaign, I think probably would be unfortunate. It'd be unfortunate for the Israeli families who've just spent the last hour terrified, hiding in their shelters. It'd be deeply unfortunate for the almost 1 million people here in Lebanon who've been forced from their homes. The children, the mothers, the innocent civilians around this region who've become victims of this much wider war, not of their choosing. I think that will be that pressure, though. It's interesting, Lindsey Graham's statement there. What happened in April, remember, again, this was a kind of tit-for-tat response, but the lid was kept on it. Iran fired at Israel, and Israel intercepted over 99% of those incoming missiles, and Israel responded, but it was kind of kept to a certain tempo. There is a huge risk here that that tempo can't be maintained. Was this just Iran making a show of force? They had to respond in some way after the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, and also, of course, because of the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah here in Beirut. They are the leaders, the creators, the supporters of this so-called axis of resistance, which involves Hamas in Gaza, the Iranian Shia groups, the pro-Iranian groups that operate in Iraq, as well as, of course, Hezbollah here. And they've all been looking to Iran ever since Nasrallah's assassination, just at the start of the weekend, for some kind of response. So was this just a show of force to say, yes, we've done our job? We saw celebratory gunfire here in Beirut tonight, and there'll be other places, certainly in the Shia crescent of countries that stretches from Iran to here in Beirut, who will be celebrating tonight. Is that enough? Is Israel's response going to be kind of tempered? I think that's the biggest question by far tonight. Will more sensible heads prevail? I think what Lindsey Graham has to say will be music to the ears of Netanyahu, and certainly to the right-wing members of his cabinet, who see this as a moment of reckoning for all of Israel's enemies. And that brings enormous danger. It brings danger for Israel, as we just saw tonight, and Israel's citizens, but it also brings enormous danger for the region. It risks drawing in other people. Now, the whole prospect of the United States being drawn into another Middle East war, when it still has troops in Iraq, of course, but nevertheless, it spent years extricating itself from the quagmire in Iraq and the quagmire in Afghanistan. The last thing that the United States needs, and even if you listen to President Trump, he's no advocate of U.S. Involvement in overseas wars. But of course, there's always a difference when you start to talk about Israel. People start to talk about religion. Involves the Christian far right, as well as the religious, the Jewish far right as well. People who advocate for a wider conflict, I think, are going to have their voices heard at the moment. But I think the real danger is that if Israel listens to them completely and responds, then we're in a whole different ballgame. Kira?
And we're still in a wait and see for what this wave 2 on behalf of Iran will look like and exactly what Israel will do in retaliation. Ian, thank you. Let's take it to our chief White House correspondent, Mary Bruce. Do we know if President Biden is still in the sit room, Mary?
We don't know exactly if he's still in the sit room right now, but of course he was monitoring this unfold in real time there with his national security team and Vice President Kamala Harris. What we do know is that there will be some kind of response. The big question, of course, is whether the U.S. will play any role in that response. The White House earlier today making very clear that there will be severe consequences for an attack like this. Of course, we do know that the U.S., has said that they will provide additional defensive support if needed. They'll protect U.S. forces operating in the region, obviously. obviously. And, to Ian's point there, when you think back to what happened in April, the U.S. at the time made, a big point of stressing that while they were helping to defend Israel, that when it came to the response, that the U.S. made very clear they had no role in any offensive operation. I would not be surprised if you see something similar play out here. Of course, this is, a different attack, different circumstances. The big picture here cannot be lost, that this is exactly what the Biden administration and what President Biden have been trying to avoid for almost a year now. This kind of escalation and turmoil in the region, this fear of a wider war, which is now very much upon us. But how does the president assist Israel, back up our ally, while also not getting the U.S. dragged further into this, especially not, let's be honest, with an election now just around the corner here in the U.S.?
Yeah, it's the timing of all of this is quite adds quite a twist, Mary, for sure. Let's take it to our senior investigative correspondent, Aaron Katursky, there in New York. This strike happening so close to the high holiday, the Jewish New Year. It starts at sundown tomorrow. Aaron, you were reporting that concerns overseas translating here to concerns here at home, and law enforcement already taking up precautions, adding more security to synagogues in the New York area.
And they were doing that not just in New York. We heard from Los Angeles, from a number of departments, that we're going to be paying extra attention to places associated with the Jewish community in advance of the high holidays, beginning, as you say, tomorrow evening, the start of Rosh Hashanah. But more importantly, what precipitated what's unfolding now, the death of Hassan Nasrallah, the Hezbollah leader, in an Israeli attack, that in and of itself may not galvanize any individuals in this country. He doesn't have a big following in the United States. But what's playing out on TV, their intelligence officials are a little more concerned that could cause somebody to act out. And in fact, we just had a look at an assessment from the Department of Homeland Security saying that in addition to this missile barrage, one concern for the United States would be whether Iran follows it up with attacks on cyber infrastructure, cyber attacks on American infrastructure. That would be one concern here, in addition to the lone wolf who may see what's going on their TV and decide to take matters into their own hands. That's why the alert among law enforcement officials in this country has been so high ever since last October 7th and leading to the year anniversary since the Hamas attack on Israel, Kira.
Aaron, thank you. Senior national policy reporter Ann Flaherty joining us from the Pentagon now. What's the word there at the Pentagon? And as we know, additional U.S. troops have been sent to the region, not to get involved in any type of ground war, of course, but there are assets out in the waters to help. And the president has made it very clear that the U.S. military will help Israel defend itself. But what do we know at this point, after we've witnessed this first wave of missile attacks on behalf of Iran? What will be the role of those extra added U.S. troops, and what happens next as we wait for Israel to make a decision? And do we know if our military leaders are in contact with the IDF or leadership there in Israel?
Well, Kira, they say that they are certainly in constant contact. One of the things that we're just learning now at this hour is that the U.S. did help in intercepting some of these missiles. One of the things that I think was interesting was about 20 minutes before the barrage began, we saw a statement come across our emails from the Pentagon saying, if Iran acts, the U.S. and Israel believes that it should endure significant consequences. That's a quote, significant consequences. And then, of course, by the time it was in our email inboxes, we were already seeing the attack play out. So now, of course, the question is, what will the U.S. role be, if any, in responding to this attack? The U.S. saying that top of mind for them in this building, the Pentagon officials say, are the 40,000 U.S. troops that are in that region. We have a lot of troops stationed on ships, Iraq and Syria, and in drone bases, all of them. They are very nervous that these service members might be caught in the crosshairs. They, of course, want to also defend Israel and Israel's right to defend itself. They say that that is a very clear message. But we're going to be hearing from the Pentagon later today. And, of course, I think one of the top questions will be, what role will the U.S. play in any kind of retaliation from Israel?
Okay. And so can you guys tell me where we're going next? Okay, great. All right, Ann Flaherty, thank you so much. Of course, we've got a lot of moving parts here with all our correspondents overseas and here back at home, from the Pentagon to the White House to what we've been monitoring here over in Israel. We are getting more pictures in, it looks like, as we have been talking about Iran's first wave of a two-wave attack, that country says, on Israel, a retaliatory attack, as we have seen a number of Hamas leaders and even the head of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, killed in an Israeli airstrike on Friday. All of this unfolding within the past year, since October 7th, when Hamas attacked Israel. We have watched these Iranian proxies targeted by Israel. Now Iran responding with these missile attacks today. They say it will be two waves of missile attacks. Israel now in a wait-and-see mode to see what that second wave will look like. And we're in a wait-and-see mode, too, to see exactly what Israel will do next. A lot of politics are playing in here as well. And we've seen leaders here in the U.S. weighing in on what is happening in the Middle East. My next guest is a senior advisor for the Trump campaign, Danielle Alvarez. Danielle, thank you for joining us. We've had, as you've seen, within the past almost 2 hours, the breaking news of Iran launching that barrage of missiles at Israel. Former President Trump did release a statement that I see saying that if I win, there will be peace in the world. He hasn't exactly outlined his strategy for dealing with the crisis in the Middle East right now. So please tell us, if Trump were indeed to win the presidency, what exactly does he plan to do about what we're witnessing right now in the Middle East?
Well, the thing that I can say with certainty is that this never would have happened if President Donald Trump was in the White House. I mean, there was peace. He had signed historic Abraham Accords and brought historic peace to the Middle East. And this truly is weakness from Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, who have emboldened Iran. It's absolutely devastating to see. I pray for everyone in Israel right now, and certainly all of the correspondents that ABC has covering. As we see this unfold, it's absolutely tragic, and it's something that the president is going to address. He is in Wisconsin right now. I just got off the phone on the tarmac, and it's something that he is going to address at the top of his remarks at his event in Wisconsin.
And of course, we'll follow that, Danielle. But I do want to ask you, as his surrogate, if he were president right now, what would he do?
Again, it just never would have happened. He's someone who can bring everyone to have a seat at the table and can deliver peace that way, and certainly peace through strength. He is someone, again, who delivered the historic Abraham Accords and brought peace that nobody thought was possible to the Middle East. And so that strength and leadership is something that we're missing in the White House, and something that we will return to in November.
In his statement earlier today, former President Trump also mentioned the war in Ukraine, and Senator Vance has been very outspoken in his opposition to providing funding for Ukraine. He's also floated a plan that would allow Russia to keep the Ukrainian territory that is captured, something Ukrainian President Zelensky calls dangerous. But is that plan part of the solution that former President Trump says he has for ending the war between Ukraine and Russia?
Well, as you know, President Trump met with President Zelensky in Trump Tower just recently, and the conversation that they had was very simple. They need to end this war. We need to stop the death, the destruction that is going on. And the promise was that each side would be happy, but I don't want to get ahead of the president in his plans.
Well, Senator Vance once said that Trump would veto a nationwide abortion ban. I want to talk about what's going to happen tonight, and that is the vice presidential debate that's going to be taking place. As we know, during the presidential debate, Trump said he had never discussed that with his running mate. Vance later said, quote, learned his lesson about speaking for Trump. But why did he say that in the first place? And what do you expect him to say tonight as we take this debate with Governor Tim Walz?
I think the most important thing to keep in mind as we head into the vice presidential debate tonight is that voters really are yearning to hear a about policy. We learned that obviously from the ABC debate that was hosted not long ago, that voters want to know what each candidate is going to do on those key issues that polling tells us is top of mind. And those issues obviously include the economy, inflation, obviously the border. I think, you know, I would imagine CBS is going to pivot, and we're going to talk a lot about what is currently unfolding in the Middle East now. And it is these vice presidential nominees' challenge to deliver the message for each of our tickets to voters. And obviously, on the Republican side, on the Trump-Vance ticket, we know that there is a track record for a strong economy, for a secure border, for safety and peace through strength at home and abroad.
Well, there's a clear divide in the polling right now where men favor the Trump-Vance ticket and women are favoring Harris and Walz. Senator Vance has come under fire, as we know, for some of his past comments criticizing what he called childless cat ladies. Do you think tonight gives him a chance to do a little damage control?
You know, actually, in previous elections, for example, in the 2016 elections, the Democrats won female votes by 12 points in the latest CNN poll. Actually, President Trump had cut that margin by 2 points. So we're doing well in all polling, whether it's battleground polling, whether you look at numbers like with Hispanic voters, whether you're looking at numbers with young voters, cutting in margins with black voters. And again, it's because President Trump is trusted on those top issues. Voters feel like he can restore the economy and really believe in his promise to make America great again, to unleash American energy, to unleash the American worker. And I think that that should be the main priority because it's what viewers want to see. They want to know what they can expect out of their future. We know that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz have been dodging. We know that President Trump and JD take those tough interviews, do those rallies, do those gaggles. And so I think we're going to see more of that tonight, but I certainly hope for all the viewers watching that CBS has a large responsibility to make sure to focus on those key issues.
One more question, Danielle. You know, Senator Vance has also come under fire, as you know, for spreading all those false rumors that Haitian migrants are eating household pets in his home state of Ohio. Ohio's Republican governor said it's not true and asked him to stop. Why did the senator amplify a false story about his own state without even checking out the facts first? I mean, he even reiterated in an interview saying sometimes he just makes stories up to grab people's attention.
So Senator Vance was very clear. He had received feedback from his constituents, his priority obviously being the senator from Ohio. He listened and he had heard the 911 calls. Really the crux of the problem, however, is that this small town in Springfield, Ohio, which normally has a population of 60,000, had 20,000 Haitian immigrants dropped on the town. It has overwhelmed resources, whether it's school, whether it's healthcare. So it really is an issue that we're seeing across the nation. I heard anecdotally, similarly, it's happening in towns and in communities in Virginia. I know that it's happening across the country where, because, as DHS has reported, 10 million illegal immigrants, probably that number is larger, probably millions and millions more, have illegally crossed that southern border across the country. Communities are being overwhelmed, whether it's with illegal immigrants, rising migrant crime, with fentanyl pouring in. I mean, it's absolutely devastating. It's something that our country cannot sustain, and it's something that we know in polling that Americans support President Trump's plan to secure the border.
Look forward to the vice presidential debate tonight. Thank you so much. Of course, we'll have full team coverage of that between Governor Tim Walz and Senator J.D. Vance. It starts at tonight, 8 p.m. Eastern, right here on ABC News Live. We'll be right back.
Whenever, wherever news breaks, it's so important to always remember that lives are changed. Here in London, in Buffalo, Uvalde, Texas, Edinburgh, Scotland. Reporting from Rolling Fork, Mississippi. Ukrainian refugees here in Warsaw. We're heading to a small community outside of Mexico City. Getting you behind the stories as they happen. ABC News Live Prime. We'll take you there.
Stream ABC News Live weeknights wherever you stream your news. Only on ABC News Live.
It's the only way you feel connected to anyone.
It becomes
everything.
There's so much hate.
The more time I spend on social media, the more anxious I feel.
Teenagers agreed to share their private accounts and digital experiences.
You edit your body to be something it's not. I don't want to look at my kids' TikTok.
People would just call you the N-word.
It's up to us to figure out how we can still be people.
America's #1 most-watched daytime talk show is ABC's The View.
You all heard it here first. I love it. I'm there for it.
Hot topics, political views.
That's what we're about.
Voices that matter. It all goes down right here.
That's why it's called the what? The View. I love it. I'm all in. Second that. This is going to be must-see TV, and so much could happen.
One great idea can change your life.
That's what Shark Tank does.
That's the American dream right there.
This calling is for my kids.
What you've done is remarkable.
I'm going to make you an offer.
One of the most innovative things I've seen in my life.
This could be our biggest deal ever.
Emmy-winning Shark Tank season premiere October 18th on ABC and stream on Hulu.
Why do so many people start their day here?
From ABC News, this is Start Here.
To be in the know and get a different take on the day's top stories.
A lot of news today, so let's get into it.
Listen now to the Daily News Podcast honored with 4 Edward R. Murrow Awards and see why the New York Times calls it a news podcast worth listening to. Start Here, ABC News. Make it your daily first listen.
Now, that's a part of the story I bet you didn't see coming.
Wherever you get your podcasts, Start Here.
Glad you're streaming with us. We do have breaking news that we're continuing to cover. Iran launching a barrage of missiles at Israel. Hello, everyone. I'm Kira Phillips. Air raid sirens blaring across Tel Aviv as the rockets lit up the night sky. Senior administration official telling ABC that Israel is expecting a total of 240 to 250 missiles from Iran. The missiles are expected to come in 2 waves, hitting multiple targets within Israel. Israel making it very clear there will be consequences, and it does have a plan. It's a plan that we are waiting on this hour. The White House saying that President Biden and Vice President Harris have been monitoring the attack from the Situation Room. The president has directed the U.S. military to aid Israel's defense against Iran's attacks, and also apparently American forces have now intercepted some of those Iranian missiles. The IDF says it appears that the rockets have stopped flying for now, and it is telling people that they can leave their protected spaces. Israeli police also say that 6 people were killed in another incident, a terror shooting, they say. It happened in Tel Aviv. It was all happening at the same time. We do have team coverage. We want to start with Inez de la Cuetera there in Tel Aviv, where, Inez, it has calmed down quite a bit. We saw cars back out on the road, folks coming out from the shelters. However, Israel's still in a wait-and-see mode, expecting another wave of attacks from Iran. And then, of course, the big question remains, what exactly is Israel going to do about it?
That's right, Kira. Yeah, so we have been given the all clear for now. The IDF spokesman Daniel Hagari saying they don't believe there is any new threat at this time. So residents have been told they can leave their shelters. But really a remarkable night this evening, a frankly scary night. Over 180 missiles fired from Iran at Israel. People were told to take cover. We here in Tel Aviv had to go to the shelter. There are shelters on every floor. We heard those loud booms, those interceptions, the Iron Dome intercepting those missiles. We know that there were sites in central Israel that were targeted as well. We understand that Israeli military sites were targeted. And in Jerusalem, our colleagues in Jerusalem were also reporting interceptions there. So we know the U.S. did participate in those interceptions, as it did, last time around when there was another big attack from Iran back in April. Over 99% of those, hundreds of missiles that had been fired at Israel were intercepted. Then we're still waiting to hear just how many may have been intercepted this time around. But like you say, the big question is what happens next. Israel has vowed to retaliate. They say they do have a plan and will respond at the time and place of their choosing.
All right, let's take... Can we go to Seth Crumrich, please, retired colonel in the United States Army and former chief of staff at Special Operations Command Central. Seth, it's great to have you at this time when we're sitting here in this wait-and-see moment, not sure what exactly Israel is going to do. We saw that first wave of missile attacks that seemed to, I guess, been through the Iron Dome, taken down without issue. Folks there in Israel back on the streets, coming out of their shelters. However, Iran saying there is going to be a second wave, and what exactly that could mean. And then, of course, what exactly is Israel going to do? So just your background and your understanding of how the Middle East works and attacks that we have, of course, watched over the years. How do you see this playing out? What do you think it has come to, and what is Israel going to do?
Absolutely. It's the million-dollar question. It really boils down to three things from my experience. The first is what was targeted, how effective were the strikes, and then what weapons were used. And this is really critical because if it was truly all ballistic missiles, which only take 12 minutes to get from Iran to Israel, then that is a much different message than when they send drones, which are slower than easier to intercept. And the so what is this, and you just hit it. It's based on really history. For the last 20 years, there's been proportionality between Israel and Iran when it comes to strike versus counterstrike. And they've always maintained this proportionality. But the big change over the last, say, 8 months to a year, of course, has been this proportionality escalation. And the real question to me is this. Does Israel maintain its clear focus on putting their citizens back into northern Israel and doing operations in southern Lebanon to remove the threat? Or are they going to be forced to do those operations and deal directly with Iran? So when we say wait and see, this is really what we're looking for right now.
So apparently the IDF is taking responsibility now for killing the commander of the unit for the transfer of weapons from Iran and its affiliates to Hezbollah and Lebanon. This just came out moments ago in a statement. Your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. They have an exquisite intelligence apparatus because it's not just the weapons, it's got to be your ability to target. And they're disrupting and destroying and degrading key commanders, which really weakens the command and control of Iran and its proxies. And Iran has this growing list now that they say, hey, look, we're going to do payback. Whether it's Hania, whether it's Nasrallah, or this latest strike, this list of degraded or killed commanders, Iran has to do something, but there's risk for Iran. If all their missiles are shot down and they look completely incompetent in their response, that is going to blow back on them because there's two audiences. There's the international community in Israel, and there's the Iranian street where they have to look strong because there's a homegrown threat there that they have to address.
I mean, if you just look at all the leadership that's been taken out within the past year, ever since Hamas attacked Israel back on October 7th, I mean, commanders within Hamas, political leaders, and then you see all the attacks. I'm just looking at all the various dates, Seth, and then on September 17th, the pager and walkie-talkie explosions that killed Hezbollah leaders there in Lebanon, and then everything culminating to September 27th, where Israel worked slow and diligently with those bunker buster bombs, taking out Hezbollah's main commander, Hassan Nasrallah. I mean, Iran is losing all its support, all its proxies. I mean, are they going at it alone now? And what do you think that means? Is it possible that in any way, shape, or form they will be forced to back down? Or does Israel go so hard it takes out the regime?
No, it's a great question. This is really all about context. So yes, key leaders have been killed from Hezbollah, but Hezbollah is a very large organization. It's much more sophisticated than Hamas. So there's some intel analysts will tell you that there's over 150,000 fighters sitting in southern Lebanon that can be mobilized against any attack that comes in. So it's critical to disrupt that command and control by killing all those commanders and making their response to any sort of Israeli incursion to make it disjointed or just not synchronized. And that will maximize the effectiveness of any operations that Israel takes. But make no mistake, Israel's goal here is to put their citizens back in northern Israel. It's not to go in and hold ground inside of Lebanon for a long period of time. And one of the main reasons is that there's 150,000 mobilized Israeli soldiers that have to cover all of these fronts: Gaza, West Bank, Golan Heights, southern Lebanon, and northern Israel. So there is a limit to what they're going to be able to mass and be able to execute. You add these strikes in today, there's a calculus that's going on in Tel Aviv right now for what are our priority targets and how are we going to address them. So the next 24 to 48 hours will be fascinating.
And we're watching closely. Seth, appreciate you. We want to take it now to Beirut, where our foreign correspondent Marcus Moore is. What's the latest from Beirut, Marcus?
Well, Kara, we are continuing to watch and wait for what happens next, as we have really seen a remarkable event unfold in Israel. Iran firing some 180 rockets, as we heard Inez reporting. Many of those rockets raining down over Tel Aviv and other parts of Israel. Iran, for its part, has said that this was in response to the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, as well as the assassination of other top leaders, including Hezbollah's Hassan Nasrallah, and essentially trying to make the case that that their response was justified and that this was not meant to be an escalation, but a response that they said would be coming, and one that Iran said came after a lot of self-restraint. That was what they used, words they used in the statement that they released tonight. But as you've been talking about with all of our guests and my colleagues, that the question now is what happens and what impact will it have on the millions of innocent people caught in the middle of this. As you know, we are here in Beirut, where we have watched for several days Israel carry out its bombardment, including targeted strikes even today, several of them earlier this evening in the Dahia district of southern Beirut, where they have targeted other key members, they say, of Hezbollah. But we've also seen them carry out strikes outside of that area. And it all speaks to really the volatile nature of this situation and how this is still far from over and no one knows what's going to happen next. And in the midst of that, Kira, you have tens of thousands of people who have been displaced from their homes, many of them who have watched this event unfold tonight, unsure of what they will be doing with their lives in the hours and days ahead. Kira?
Yeah, Israel has the upper hand and is in full control at this moment, but all the innocent bystanders, whether it's in Beirut or Tel Aviv or Jerusalem, they don't have a choice in the matter. Let's take it to our political contributor, Asma Khalid now. Asma, you know, President Biden has been pushing for a ceasefire. He has been wanting a peaceful end to all of this. I think Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has made it pretty clear that's off the table, and he's going to do things his way.
That's right. You know, I think throughout this conflict, particularly in the last several months, as you saw President Biden articulate sort of a very clear outline for a ceasefire, the ceasefire plan you mentioned, you know, I remember I was there at the White House. This was announced at the end of May, and many months went forward, and we heard from White House officials that it looked like it was going to be near the end. You'd often hear that Hamas wasn't really on board with this ceasefire, but also sources have told me that there were moments where Netanyahu also changed the parameters of what he wanted there. And I think the really big challenge has been, as one Middle East source told me, you as the negotiating party cannot want this ceasefire more than the parties on the ground involved. And that's where I think the struggle has been for Biden. This White House has wanted an end to the conflict, but it's not clear that the parties involved wanted it as much as Biden.
Asma, thank you. Jay O'Brien's at the White House for us today. So I guess two questions for you, Jay, as we're getting a number of leaders from the Hill weighing in on what's happening overseas. We do know that the president was in the sit room, the vice president right next to him, monitoring what was happening as Iran was launching those missiles. Do we know what exactly he is doing now? And is he also in a wait-and-see mode, waiting to see what Israel is going to do? Or do you think he'll get a heads up from Benjamin Netanyahu as to what may happen next?
Well, a number of different things to unpack in that. Firstly, I can tell you that when the president and the vice president were in the Situation Room, it was largely, White House officials say, to coordinate the defensive response. The U.S. participated in trying to shoot down some of these missiles and succeeding in shooting down some of these missiles. Exactly how many the Israelis were able to intercept versus the U.S. and potentially other allies shooting down is very much unclear. But we know that that was what the president and the vice president were monitoring there, the defensive ability by U.S. military assets to shoot down some of these missiles in participation, of course, in defending their Israeli partners. We also know that senior White House officials telegraphed that there would be, quote, severe consequences for Iran if there was a direct strike of this nature at Israel. Exactly what severe consequences look like is still very much unclear. As you said, the White House is somewhat in a wait-and-see pattern. They are obviously in close touch with Israel because they were participating in shooting down some of these missiles. But to your question of will the White House get a heads up as to any kind of retaliatory response Israel crafts here, that is an open question. No one really knows the answer to that. I'll give you a good example. When Israel took out the leader of Hezbollah in that strike on that building that they said was a Hezbollah headquarters, U.S. officials got an update about that strike while it was in motion. They learned that it was happening while it was in progress. So how much of a heads up they might get to an Israeli retaliation here is still very much unclear. I can tell you, we know that White House officials are going to get questions like that and others over the course of the day. The White House press briefing was supposed to take place some time ago. It's now scheduled to begin really any moment now. And White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan will be there to brief on this issue, Kira.
And we will definitely take that live as soon as it starts. Jay, let me ask you a question as we are seeing some leaders start to weigh in, of course, on social media, Lindsey Graham in particular, really trying to urge the president, our president, to strike oil refineries in Iran, and to hope that is the next move that Israel makes as it's kind of laying out and examining its options here. Lindsey Graham saying this is the moment of choosing for the free world regarding Iran. The Ayatollah and Iranian regime are religious Nazis who want to destroy the state, their words, not mine. They want to purify Islam and attack the United States. Again, their words, not mine. The missile attack against Israel should be the breaking point, and I would urge the Biden administration to coordinate an overwhelming response with Israel, starting with Iran's ability to refine oil. These oil refineries need to be hit and hit hard because that is the source of cash for the regime to perpetrate their terror. Your thoughts, and what are you hearing from the White House?
Well, I can tell you, I mean, what Lindsey Graham says is in line with what we've seen reported, our Matt Gutman reporting, for instance, some of the more hardline Israelis believe as well, a direct strike on Iranian oil capabilities. But in looking at statements that we've seen from congressional leaders, some of Lindsey Graham's colleagues, as Lindsey Graham so often is on the issue of Iran, he has gone further than any other Republican or Democrat at this hour. He is calling for that direct strike for Israel to strike Iranian oil refineries and, as you said, for the U.S. to support in that operation if it were to take place. What I've seen in statements from other congressional Republicans, for instance, again, Lindsey Graham's colleagues in the Senate and in the House, is this idea of supporting Israel, of denouncing Iran. Roger Marshall, for instance, on the Armed Services Committee, said that, quote, Iran is a danger to, quote, danger to freedom. But no one goes as far as Lindsey Graham does to call for any kind of direct strike on Iran. They say that Israel has the right to retaliate, but they certainly don't go as far as Lindsey Graham does in saying that the U.S. should aid in any kind of direct Israeli retaliation onto Iran. So Lindsey Graham somewhat out on an island at this hour with that statement. But there's another thing to keep in mind here, which is Lindsey Graham, in those tweets that you were just reading off, also said that he talked to former President Trump and gave him that reasoning too.
Jay, we're going to take you right to the White House now where that briefing's taking place right behind you.
Just a few questions because this is an ongoing situation and I need to get back to my desk. Today, Iran launched nearly 200 ballistic missiles towards targets in Israel. The United States military coordinated closely with the Israeli Defense Forces to help defend Israel against this attack. U.S. naval destroyers joined Israeli air defense units in firing interceptors to shoot down inbound missiles. President Biden and Vice President Harris monitored the attack and the response from the White House Situation Room, joined in person and remotely by their national security team. We are still working with the IDF and the authorities in Israel to assess the impact of the attack. But at this time, and I stress at this time, we do not know of any deaths in Israel. We are tracking the reported death of a Palestinian civilian in Jericho in the West Bank. We do not know of any damage to aircraft or strategic military assets in Israel. In short, based on what we know at this point, this attack appears to have been defeated and ineffective. This was first and foremost the result of the professionalism of the IDF, but in no small part because of the skilled work of the U.S. military and meticulous joint planning in anticipation of the attack. We are also aware of reports of a terrorist attack in Jaffa that took the lives of a number of Israeli civilians and wounded several others today. Our condolences go out to the families of the victims and to the family of the Palestinian civilian in Jericho. Obviously, my update here is based on early reports, and we reserve the right to amend and adjust as necessary as we gather more information. The word fog of war was invented for a situation like this. This is a fluid situation. We will consult with the Israelis on next steps in terms of the response and how to deal with what Iran has just done, and we will continue to monitor for further threats and attacks from Iran and its proxies. We are particularly focused on protecting U.S. service members in the region. And with that, I'll take just a few questions. Yeah.
Thanks, Jake. Is the administration making any preparations to evacuate U.S. citizens from Lebanon or elsewhere in the region?
We have been very clear for some time now that U.S. citizens should avail themselves of commercial means to depart Lebanon, given everything that's going on. We have said that from this podium, from multiple podiums. We continue to say that, but we have not begun triggering a non-combatant emergency evacuation, a NEO, and do not have an intention to do so at this time. If that changes, we'll let you know. But we continue to reinforce the point. American citizens in Lebanon should follow the guidance from the State Department, which is to find civilian commercial means to depart, because in extremis, we may not be able to get them out safely. Yes.
Thanks, Jake. What is the U.S. view on whether Israel should retaliate, and what is your concern about this leading to a wider escalation of war in the region?
We've had some initial discussions with the Israelis in the aftermath of this at the military level and also at the White House to Prime Minister's office level. We'll continue those conversations in the hours ahead. I'm not going to prejudge or get ahead of anything. We want to have some deep consultations with the Israelis, and I'll have more to report to you after we get the opportunity for deeper discussions.
And escalation in the region?
Obviously, this is a significant escalation by Iran, a significant event, and it is equally significant that we were able to step up with Israel and create a situation in which no one was killed in this attack in Israel, so far as we know at this time. We are now going to look at what the appropriate next steps are to secure, first and foremost, American interests, and then to promote stability to the maximum extent possible as we go forward. Yeah.
Back in April, the president's message to Israel was to take the win when the U.S. and Israel were able to intercept the barrage of Iranian missiles. Is he recommending a similarly limited response this time?
I will not, from this podium, share the president's recommendations. He will have the opportunity to share them directly. We're going to have, as I said, ongoing consultations with the Israelis this afternoon, this evening. It is too early for me to tell you anything publicly in terms of our assessment or in terms of what our expectations are of the Israelis or the advice that we will give them.
So will he be speaking to Prime Minister Netanyahu today?
I don't have anything to announce from this podium, but I can tell you that he is tracking this minute by minute. We are very much deeply in touch with the Israelis, and insofar as we have calls to read out, we'll make sure to read them out with you. Just last question, then I'll turn it over.
Thank you, Jake. In April, after Iran struck Israel, the U.S. issued a number of sanctions as a consequence. This morning, the president said there would be severe consequences if Iran carried out this attack. What are those consequences, and are they more severe than sanctions?
Totally legitimate question, and that answer will come based on the conversations and consultations we have with our Israeli counterparts. It's too soon for me to stand before you today and give you an answer. What I can tell you is this. We are proud of the actions that we've taken alongside Israel to protect and defend Israel. We have made clear that there will be consequences, severe consequences for this attack, and we will work with Israel to make that the case. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jake. Thank you, Jake. Okay, on to the rest of the programming here. This morning, President Biden was briefed by his Homeland Security Advisor, Liz Sherwood-Randall, on the latest impacts of Hurricane Helene, and this afternoon he will receive an interagency briefing on the Hurricane Helene response and recovery efforts. At the president's direction, the Biden-Harris administration continues to use every tool available to get assistance and resources to the communities that need them the most. Yesterday, the president approved a major disaster declaration for Georgia, which will unlock additional assistance to help those recovering. This is in addition to the major disaster declaration swiftly approved by the president following requests from North Carolina, South Carolina, and Florida, as well as requests for emergency assistance across 7 states. Tomorrow, the president will travel to Raleigh, North Carolina, where he will visit the State Emergency Operations Center to meet with local officials and also first responders. And the vice president will travel to Augusta, Georgia tomorrow, and will then head to North Carolina in the coming days. As of today, thousands of personnel from across the federal workforce are deployed and supporting state-led Hurricane Helene response efforts across.
We've been following the White House briefing, Karine Jean-Pierre, there, just updating all the resources and support going into those impacted by Hurricane Helene. But just before that, we heard from National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan giving us really the first live brief from the White House since Iran attacked Israel earlier today. And looks like Mayorkas is now stepping up to the mic. He's probably going to talk about immigration efforts there. But we're going to bring it back to our Jay O'Brien, who's at the White House for us while this briefing is going on. Jay, the National Security Advisor there, talking about, and Alex Brachet, thank you for joining us now as our breaking news coverage continues. We were both listening, Jay, to Jake there, confirming that U.S. destroyers did shoot down some of those inbound missiles. So we were talking about the Iron Dome was able to deflect, of course, a number of those missiles coming in from Iran in that first wave of attacks. But now we are getting confirmation that the U.S. was able to assist as well and working with the IDF now to also assess the impact of those missiles that did move into Israel. Right now, apparently, according to Jake Sullivan, no deaths in Israel at this time. That's good news. The attack appears to be defeated and ineffective, Jake Sullivan said, right, Alex? And also, you're learning some more information with regard to the Air Force, yes?
Well, so that's right. Our global affairs team has been working on this, and an IDF official told reporters that continuing on into Tuesday night, the Israeli Air Force is going to continue conducting powerful strikes all over the Middle East. And so, again, you know, the big question was, you know, how is this going to ramp up what's already a heightened, intense situation there? What was going to be the response there? And we're getting a little bit of a telegraph here, which I don't think that anybody is shocked to see. But it's clear that, you know, there's going to be a response from Israel into tonight.
Right, and the question is, how big will that response be?
Absolutely.
Yeah, there have been these little incursions inside Lebanon. Now, you know, air assets in full force protecting the area and clearly looking for any more action on behalf of Iran as well, yes?
Well, yeah, but one of the things that was interesting going into you know, today's retaliatory attack, you know, Israel had mentioned that all of the attacks that it had carried out were in direct response and in their words, measured, right? And so with this, and even though it does seem like a lot of this was thwarted by Israeli and American forces, you know, how does that retaliatory action play out? What is the equal in their eyes?
And Jay, we know that the president was in the sit room with the vice president, of course, all his key leaders watching everything go down once the first wave of attacks came through. Iran threatening a second wave of missile attacks, however, but it seems this moment in Tel Aviv, things are calm. People have been allowed to come out of the shelters, get back onto the streets. But clearly, I guess it's a wait and see on two fronts. Will Iran attack Israel once again? And what exactly is Israel going to do about it?
Yeah, and Kira, Jake Sullivan just answered a few questions that a lot of us had in the White House briefing. I just want to tick through the various questions that he answered. The first question was, we knew that the U.S. supported Israel in shooting down these ballistic missiles, but we did not know how. We didn't know what military assets were used. Were they fighter jets, etc.? Jake Sullivan says they were naval destroyers shooting intercept missiles, so shooting their own missiles designed to target and take down those Iranian missiles. That's the first thing he answered. The other thing he answered is something you just noted, which is that early assessments, and he stressed that those assessments are early, but early assessments show that there are no Israeli deaths as a result of this Iranian attack. And then he goes on to say that President Biden is monitoring this situation minute by minute, but he doesn't have much to say yet as to exactly what the Israeli response will be and how much of a role, if any, the U.S. would play in that Israeli response. There's a telling thing that he said, in which he said there are conversations ongoing right now at this hour between the White House and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office. He did not say whether President Biden plans to speak directly with the Prime Minister, but then he said there are, quote, ongoing consultations with the Israelis. He called this a, quote, significant escalation, but he did not say exactly what the U.S. response and certainly what the Israeli response would be to all of this. All of that to underscore your point that there is so much uncertainty at this hour as to exactly what Israel plans to do now in not just the coming hours, but the coming days.
Well, and Jay, you're talking about those conversations between Netanyahu and the White House. I want to bring in our Inez de la Gatera, who's live in Tel Aviv right now. Inez, to that point, I mean, what do we know about Israel's response thus far?
Yeah, Alex, I mean, the Israelis have vowed to retaliate. They say they do have a plan and they will respond at the time and place of their choosing. But we understand, speaking to Israeli officials, and, I think analysts widely agree that this time around the response will be quick. So last time around in April, when Iran fired, hundreds of missiles at Israel, it took 5 or 6 days for Israel to respond. In this case, we're expecting it to be much shorter. So potentially this evening, potentially, tomorrow, we'll have to wait and see. But we do expect the response to be a lot quicker. What that response will look like, we don't know. And I think to Jay's point, it'll be interesting to see what the U.S. Kind of pressures Israel to do and whether Israel listens. We know in the last few days, the U.S. had been pushing for diplomacy. Prior to Hassan Nasrallah being taken out, the U.S. had been calling for that 21-day ceasefire. Israel seems to have grown increasingly comfortable with defying the U.S. And so it'll be interesting to see when it comes to this, retaliation here, whether Israel kind of, works hand in hand with the U.S. or decides to kind of defy the U.S.'s wishes and respond, as it says, at the time and place of its choosing.
Well, it sure seems that President Biden, who is pushing for a ceasefire, that idea right now is off the table. Let's take it to foreign correspondent Marcus Moore, who's in Beirut. What's the word from there, Marcus?
Well, Kira, there were gunshots that we heard in the air, in the streets of Beirut behind us. Also, there were people dancing and playing music and cheering in the streets. All of this in response to Iran's rocket barrage this evening. Certainly this has been a very significant week for people here in Beirut, particularly following the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah, because as I speak to you now, we are in several days of mourning here in Lebanon and in several other countries across the Middle East. And so a lot happening here. And to Inez's point about what happens next and whether the U.S. Can put enough pressure on Israel to contain whatever their response might be. I think when you talk to people here in Lebanon, they have long said that the U.S. U.S. officials are the only ones that can stop Israel from its bombardment or from expanding this conflict and this war. And that really is the sentiment. But at the same time, people will say, the U.S. is talking about the need for diplomacy, but at the same time, supplying Israel with weapons. And as we saw tonight, helping to defend Israel from Iran's rocket barrage. And so there really is a large part of the population here that doesn't have a lot of faith in what the U.S. officials say as it relates to a ceasefire or any potential ceasefire or anything that would put pressure on Israel. And again, that's the feeling of a lot of people here. And as I tell you that, and Kira, as you well know, in the midst of all of this, the military actions that we've seen, the talks of diplomacy, there are everyday people who are literally suffering as a result of what we've been watching unfold here, not only here in Lebanon, but also in northern Israel. They can't go back to their homes. And here in Lebanon, it's the same story. And people have lost their loved ones in the midst of what's happening here. So as we talk about what could happen next, and while diplomacy seems to have fallen short, it is the only hope that people have on either side of the border here for there to be some resolution to this.
All right, Marcus, thank you. I want to take you straight to the State Department now. I understand the briefing has begun. Can you tell me who? Okay, let's listen in.
And its partners was able to successfully defeat this attack. This was a brazen, unacceptable attack by Iran, and every nation in the world must join us in condemning it. Secretary Blinken joined President Biden, Vice President Harris, and other members of the President's national security team in monitoring this attack as it was unfolding, as well as our response. As the President has made clear, our support for Israel's security is ironclad. We will continue to stand with the people of Israel at this critical moment. With that, Matt.
Thanks, Matt. So I think this probably goes without saying, but just to make sure we get on the record. So in terms of what happened in Israel, there no damage to any U.S. facilities, no injuries, no nothing.
At this time, we are not aware of any damage to U.S. facilities. As you know, we issued an order earlier today for our personnel, State Department personnel in Israel to shelter at their homes. We have full accountability for all our personnel. We're not aware of any civilian casualties inside Israel, there, let alone an American citizen casualty. There is one report of a Palestinian who died in the West Bank, but no damage to any U.S. facility either.
And then both you and the National Security Advisor just a few minutes ago talked about this being a brazen and unacceptable escalation. But does the administration see anything that Israel has done over the course of the last 3 weeks as escalatory?
So certainly they have done things to expand the conflict. But if you look at the actions that they have taken, they were bringing terrorists to justice, terrorists who have launched attacks on Israeli civilians. If you look at what Iran did today, we have been warning for some time about the threat posed by Iran arming and funding terrorist groups across the Middle East, and the attack today just demonstrated the danger of those actions. What you saw was Iran launching a state-on-state attack to protect and defend the terrorist groups that it has built, nurtured, and that it controls. So there is a difference between the actions that we have seen Israel take to defend its civilians and what we've seen Iran take.
I'm not trying to suggest that they are equivalent. I just wanted to make sure that you didn't see.
No, we have certainly seen we've certainly seen Israel expand the nature of its attacks against Hezbollah, but it is a very different type of attack than what we saw today from a state actor against another state.
Okay, and then last one, and this has to do with Lebanon and the northern front. The situation there is, unstable and uncertain. I know that you guys have been asking Americans who might want information about assistance and possibly leaving to sign up on a form. Can you give us an update on the numbers of those and whether or not you're planning to I don't know, to do anything in the way of either U.S. government capabilities or charter flights or ferries?
Sure. So you're right. As we often do in these situations, we have directed U.S. citizens who are in Lebanon to register with the State Department for information, and especially for information with how to depart Lebanon, and we're providing them whatever information we can. We have had, as of today, around 6,000 American citizens in Lebanon who have registered with us for further information. Should be clear, not all of those American citizens are seeking assistance with departing. People are just looking for information. They're looking for options. There are a number of American citizens who live in Lebanon who have lived there for years and do not want to depart the country. So in terms of the status on the ground, the airport is still open. Commercial flights are operating, although they are available at times at reduced capacity. We are working right now with airlines to provide additional flights with more seats for American citizens. It's something that we hope to turn on in the next few days, and we will be in touch with American citizens if and when we're able to expand that capability.
How do you ensure that there are going to be seats reserved for Americans?
Now, we're working with, I can't get into the details, but we're working with commercial carriers to ensure that capability. And when we have further information and we've locked this down, it's something we'll communicate directly with American citizens who've asked for information, and then I'll be happy to come and talk about it here at the briefing room.
Thanks.
Yeah, Jim.
So given that the Secretary and the National Security Advisor just said that this attack by Iran is sort of definitively escalatory in nature. I know that you've been telling us, the Secretary even told us that for months you've been encouraging the Israelis not to respond to attacks and provocations in such a way that escalates anything further. Is the Secretary going to continue to offer that same advice to the Israelis now in the wake of these missile strikes?
I'll say a couple things about that. First, of course, Israel has the right to defend itself, as any nation does.
Okay, we were listening to a State Department briefing from Matt Miller. Top points there. They're not aware of any damage to any U.S. facilities, no U.S. fatalities in the region. Also, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken earlier today said that Israel effectively defeated this attack. Now I want to take you over to a Department of Defense briefing that's happening right now. Let's listen into Patrick Ryder.
In the face of threats from Iran and Iran-backed terrorist organizations, we'll provide a readout of that call as soon as possible. To be crystal clear, as Secretary Austin has said, should Iran, its partners, or its proxies use this moment to target American personnel or interests in the region, the United States will take every necessary measure to defend our people. And separately, I do have an update to provide on DoD support to Hurricane Helene response efforts, but I'll provide that at the end. With that, I'm happy to take your questions. We'll start with AP. Tara.
Thanks, General Ryder. What Navy destroyers were involved in helping shoot down and intercept? And given this escalation, what's being communicated between Secretary Austin and Minister Gallant right now in terms of tampering things down and potentially avoiding a wider war?
So the two Navy destroyers involved were the USS Bulkley and the USS Cole. In terms of the conversations between Secretary Austin and Minister Gallant, I won't get into the private discussions other than to say we are consulting closely with them on next steps and the continued defense of Israel.
And then, are there any plans underway to conduct a NEO given the increased risk of a wider war?
Right now, there has been no order to evacuate. As you've heard us say before, we are a planning organization, so we, of course, plan for all contingencies. But as of right now, State Department has not called for an evacuation. Jennifer.
Should we assume that the SM-3s were used by the Cole and the Bulkley to shoot down or to intercept the missiles?
I'm not going to get into the specific type of ordnance, Jennifer, other than to say, again, they fired a dozen interceptors.
And Iran said that they gave a heads up to the U.S. and to Russia. How much warning were you given by Iran?
Yeah, I'm not aware of any pre-warning by Iran about their potential attack. As you know, this is something we've been following very closely for a while, based on the threats of retaliation by Iran. And so we've been closely consulting with Israel for a while now to be prepared in the eventuality. And as today demonstrated, we were prepared and we were able to successfully work alongside Israel to defend them from this attack. Let me go to Carla.
Thanks, Pat. You said that the destroyers shot down Iranian missiles. Where do they come from? Were they all from inside Iran, or was some also from Yemen being shot by the Houthis?
Carla, to my knowledge, and again, we're still assessing this, these were all launched from Iran, ballistic missiles. And what I said was that they fired the interceptors towards those missiles. So.
And then were any other U.S. assets involved in this defense?
Of course, we have a lot of capability in the region, a lot of things that are there to be prepared for a wide variety of threats. But in terms of the launching of these interceptors, it was those 2 destroyers.
So just being clear, no ground-based interceptors were used in this.
Correct.
Were the were you aware of any duds that didn't fire off, that maybe Iran wanted to fire more than the roughly 200?
As I mentioned, we're still assessing the outcome of the attack, and so we'll have much more information later. But these are all, our initial reports.
And then on the second call with the Secretary and Minister Gallant, did he urge Israel not to respond or to moderate any response to Iran, or did Gallant share any of Israeli intentions for their potential response here?
Well, again, as I'm sure you can appreciate, I'm just not going to be able to get into the details of their call, other than to say, again, we're consulting closely about next steps and the continued defense of Israel.
What does Secretary Austin think about the potential for an Israeli response here? Would he urge them, without saying what he said in the call necessarily, but what are his feelings about the potential? Would he urge them restraint, or? Well, look, if you take a step back here, we fully support Israel's right to defend itself. You just saw a very significant ballistic missile attack by Iran against Israel. And so, we'll continue to work alongside them to support their defense. We, of course, do not want to see a wider regional conflict. You've heard us say that many times, and we'll continue to work towards that end. But we also fully understand the fact that this was a significant attack by Iran, and so we're going to continue to consult closely, and we're going to continue to support their defense. Let me go to Laura.
Thank you. Just a couple of clarifications. Did you say that the U.S. destroyers had intercepted or shot down the missiles, or just that they fired?
I said that they fired approximately a dozen interceptors against the incoming Iranian missiles.
Okay. And were there any U.S. aircraft that shot interceptors at Iranian missiles?
What I've read out is what participated in the defense of Israel. Okay.
And then, sorry, just one more. Can you say if there were any drones or cruise missiles that were involved in the Iranian
Again,
attack?
still assessing it right now. It appears it was ballistic missiles, no drones, but again, we'll continue to assess. Let me go to Joseph, and then we'll come here.
Thank you. Just want to turn to the Israeli invasion in Lebanon. For the past couple of months, the department and the secretary have called for de-escalation. You guys have voiced your opposition to any ground incursion, invasions, limited operations. After we found out that the Israeli strike last week killed the Hezbollah chief, Hassan Nasrallah, it seems like the tone changed. From the statements last night, the department and the secretary said they supported what Israel is doing. So what changed for a change in that tone and that stance from the department?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, Joseph, is we fully support Israel's right to defend itself against Hezbollah. As we understand it, they will be conducting limited operations to destroy Hezbollah infrastructure that's arrayed along the border there that could be used to threaten Israeli citizens. And so we're continuing to consult with the Israelis to better understand how they intend to go forward. Obviously, I'd refer you to them to talk or ask questions about details regarding those operations. But we fully understand as part of their overall efforts to return people home that they do need to address those threats that are along the border there. And so all that to say, we will continue to consult with the Israelis and other partners in the region long term about how we can ultimately de-escalate those tensions and get to a ceasefire.
Have they asked for any help from you guys doing whatever it is that they want to do?
No. Yes, sir.
Were the United States surprised by the scale of the Iranian attack on Israel?
Well, look, like I said before, we've been monitoring this for a while. Iran had been very public about its threats to retaliate, and so it's something that we've been monitoring. Certainly, this was a significant attack, probably about twice the size in terms of scope of what we saw earlier. But again, we're still assessing the outcomes of this. And as I highlighted at the top, we certainly condemn this reckless attack, this direct attack against Israel, and we'll continue to support Israel's defense.
Several Israeli media spoke about a response tonight, Israeli response tonight to this attack, including some, not just Iran, some other Middle Eastern countries. will the United States be assisting the Israelis in their response?
Well, I'm not going to speculate about hypotheticals. I'd refer you to the Israelis to talk about,
I'm asking about will the Americans help them with their
Well, what you're asking me is if they're going to do something, and what I'm saying is I'm not going to speculate about what or if they may do. As I highlighted to several of your colleagues, we're consulting closely with the Israelis in terms of next steps, with the emphasis being the defense of Israel. So let me go to this side of the room. Oren.
Essentially a follow-up to that question, is the U.S. willing to strike Iran in response to this? Are you putting that on or off the table?
Well, look, Arnett, again, I don't want to get into hypotheticals. I think I was very clear at the top that should U.S. forces be targeted by Iran or its proxies, we'll take necessary steps to defend our people. And I think we've also been very clear that we're going to support the defense of Israel. And so I'm not going to get into theoretical or speculative operations at this stage, other than to say, we mean what we say and we say what we mean.
And then a follow-up question. Iran claims to have used a new Fatah missile, which is supposed to be a hypersonic ballistic missile. Can you assess whether they did use new and advanced weaponry in this attack and whether they learned from the April attack?
Again, we're still assessing the attack and the outcomes, and so we may have more to provide later, but I don't have anything on that right now. Dan.
Thanks for your time. Two questions, please. On Secretary Austin's statement last night, he referred to being supportive of operations along the border. Is he open to Israel using operations on both sides of the border? Along the border was a little vague there.
Well, I think I'd go back to how I responded to Joseph, right? We understand and support Israel's right to defend itself against Hezbollah, as we highlighted in the readout. We understand that part of that is dismantling some of the attack infrastructure that Hezbollah has built along the border. Certainly, again, we don't want to see this, broaden into a wider regional conflict, but we understand, again, that what Israel is doing are limited operations to destroy that attack infrastructure, and then enable citizens on both sides of the border to return home. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we do think that a diplomatic resolution is the only way to achieve lasting stability and security across the Israel-Lebanon border. So, we're going to continue to work to that end. But we also, again, understand Israel's need to defend itself.
And then a follow. The State Department read out a report on an attack on a diplomatic facility at Baghdad Airport last night. Have you seen any other attacks on U.S. forces, I guess, since Friday? This one would seem to be on a diplomatic facility, but be it in the last day, particularly at this heightened time of tension, or just broadly over the last couple of days?
Yeah, as of right now, I'm not aware of any additional attacks. Thanks. Sir.
The Iron Dome, how effective is it against ballistic missiles? And some of the televised images appeared to show some of them landing on infrastructure. Are you aware of that? In general, was this attack more effective than the Iranian attack in April?
Again, understanding that a lot is still very initial. As I highlighted, initial indications are that there was minimal damage on the ground. In terms of the specifics, though, I'd have to refer you to Israel really to talk through that. And again, as more information comes in, we'll certainly know more. But the initial assessment is that Israel was able to successfully defend itself, of course, with the support from the U.S. And so, again, we may have more later on that. Helene?
Thanks, Pat. I just want to be clear because it seems like we're at a very dangerous time where any kind of ambiguity from the U.S. could lead to an attack on American troops. And when you say I understand when you say that we're going to defend any attack at American troops. I also understand that that you said that no American troops were hurt. Therefore, are you saying the U.S. is not planning on a kinetic strike against Iran? Because right now, when you say there will be consequences, all of that, you're leaving it vague and people don't understand. And I want to understand, are we going to be joining Israel in hitting back against Iran in a kinetic manner?
Yeah, so with all due respect, you're talking about a hypothetical future, right, and presupposing what Israel may or may not do. So I'm just not going to talk about.
But you said there will be consequences, and Jake Sullivan said there will be consequences. So
right,
what does
and
that
I think
mean?
broadly speaking, the U.S. has been clear that there will be security, economic consequences should Iran attack, but I just don't have anything to preview, specifically as it relates to that. All right. Yes, sir.
Thanks, Pat. Just to clarify, did any U.S. aircraft track any of the missiles either before the launch or during the attack, even if they weren't involved kinetically in the defense of Israel?
So I won't go into specifics, Chris, other than to say, as you well know, we have a wide variety of ISR capabilities throughout the region to monitor and track potential aerial threats, to include aircraft that do that. So I'll just leave it there. Okay. Charlie.
Thank you, General. I know you said repeatedly that Iran doesn't telegraph these attacks, yet from early this morning, we were told that an attack would be imminent. So we're getting some sort of information from somewhere. Based on whatever that was based on, where does Iran stand now? Is this just the first salvo? From your assessment, are they positioned to go ahead and pull the trigger again at will?
That's really a question for Iran. As evidenced by this attack, they certainly maintain the capability to conduct additional attacks. As I highlighted at the top, we call on them to halt any further attacks, and we'll continue to assess. We'll also continue to be prepared to respond in the defense of Israel should they opt to do another one. We certainly hope that they do not, but we obviously have to be prepared in that eventuality.
I just want to clarify. I think you said earlier this is twice the size and scope from the attack of April 13th.
Yeah, it's about twice as large in terms of the number of ballistic missiles that they launched from the last.
Do you believe it was their intent to actually do damage this time?
Well, look, you don't launch that many missiles at a target without the intent of hitting something. So absolutely, just like the last time, their intent is to cause destruction. And so, fortunately, Israel has very significant air defense capabilities, and the U.S., of course, played a role in helping on that front as well. Thank you. Matt?
Thanks, Pat. You said there have been no new attacks on U.S. forces in the region, but is the department tracking a greater threat now to U.S. forces, and are you taking any extra measures on top of the recent plus-ups you've done for force protection?
Well, Matt, as you know, we're always taking force protection very seriously. We're all very well aware of the heightened tensions in the region, and U.S. Central Command has been, for a long time now, constantly assessing and reassessing the threat to ensure that our forces are protected. Like I mentioned, I'm not aware, as I come to the podium, I'm not aware of any additional attacks beyond the one that Dan mentioned, but it's something that we'll obviously be keeping a close eye on to protect our forces.
Secondly, were there any other nations other than the United States and Israel who took part in intercepting missiles or helping to track them or anything like that?
Yeah, I don't have anything to provide on that, and obviously I wouldn't speak for other countries from here. Yes, sir.
General, I'd like to ask you if you guys talked to the European allies and if you asked for military support in protecting Israel in case of another attack from Israel or the proxies, or is at the moment it's only the U.S. Helping Israel military-wise?
Well, I'll allow other countries to speak for themselves. I will say, and we'll put a readout on this this afternoon, as soon as we're done here. The Secretary did have an opportunity to talk to his French counterpart earlier this morning, just to talk about the situation in the Middle East. This was before the Iranian attack occurred. And so, we'll get that out momentarily. Broadly speaking, though, again, in terms of any European coordination or cooperation with Israel, that's really for individual countries to talk to. I won't speak to them. Let me go to the phone real quick before I get in trouble. Task and Purpose, Jeff Schogel.
Thank you. I understand that the destroyers fired about a dozen interceptors. Did they hit any of the missiles? If so, how many?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. So again, we're, as you highlight, they fired the interceptors. We're still assessing again, outcomes of that. So I can't really, I just don't have more information to provide at this time. Okay, let me go to Heather from USNI.
Hi, thank you so much. So you mentioned that the United States has the ability and intent to respond if any of its service members are attacked. Over on Friday, you had two U.S. destroyers and a LCS come under attack from the Houthis. Which is an Iranian proxy group. So would that give, is there any intention to launch any attacks in response to those service members coming under attack?
Well, first of all, Heather, as you are aware, there were no U.S. service members injured in any of those attacks. And as always, we will respond appropriately at a time and place of our choosing, but I'm not going to telegraph or, speculate on any punches at this time. All right, and Patrick Tucker, Defense One.
Hey, thanks for doing this. So on the announcement of 3 additional aircraft squadrons, F-15s, F-16s, A-10s, I presume that they weren't involved in any of the interception activity. Can you talk a little bit about why they're there and what role they might fill now in terms of enhancing security for U.S. forces in the region?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as we've been highlighting for a while, we have a robust amount of capability in the Central Command and U.S. European Command regions. And what those capabilities provide us is versatility in terms of responding to a variety of contingencies. And so, basically having the right tools in the toolkit to be able to respond appropriately to any type of attack or contingency situation. And so, as you well know, Pat, fighter aircraft can perform a variety of missions to include taking down drones, taking down missiles, particular kinds of missiles, as well as providing ISR, electronic warfare, and types of capabilities. So all of this comes together to provide us with options on how best to respond to any type of attack and to protect our forces. Let me come back to the room here. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, General. First, on Iran, after today's attack and the expected response from Israel, is the assessment at the Pentagon still that the situation in the Middle East still under control and we're not in all-out war yet? And the second question on Lebanon, excuse me, what's your understanding to what Israel is calling limited ground operations or incursion? Is it limited by, in time, in scope? How do you see this?
Sure. So in terms of your first question, as you know, we've been working very hard from the beginning to prevent a wider regional conflict. Certainly the type of aggressive action that we saw by Iran today makes that more challenging. But that continues to remain our focus and remain our goal is to prevent a wider regional conflict. And so we'll continue to stay laser focused on that. In terms of Israel's operations, again, they're in the best position to answer questions. But our understanding in consulting with them is that, again, these will be limited operations focused on dismantling facilities that Hezbollah has built along the border to stage attacks into Israel. And so, part of those discussions, again, have been focused on making sure that there's an understanding as far as potential mission creep. And so as it relates to the broader tensions in the region. But again, we support their right to defend themselves from Hezbollah attacks. And so we'll continue to consult with them on that. As I mentioned, Wafa, ultimately, we do believe that a diplomatic resolution is the only way to achieve lasting stability and security there. A few more. Phil.
A couple small questions. One is, why weren't land-based air defenses used? And did you find that you had, did the United States have fewer partners in trying to knock down these Iranian missiles this time than it did in April?
I would compare it to a pallet, Phil, you're going to use the capability that you need to respond to a particular situation. So, as evidenced by the fact that our forces were able to so quickly support Israel's defense, we have a wide range of capabilities arrayed to be able to respond to whatever those threats may be in the most appropriate way possible. So it's less about the platform and it's more about the capability. Again, we still maintain a robust capability to be able to respond to any potential future threats as well.
And I just want to follow up on what Helene was asking, which was important in the sense, I think you said a red line that if Iran or its forces were to attack U.S. troops, there would be a U.S. response against Iran. At least that's what it sounded like you were saying. Is that correct?
What I said is it should be very clear that if Iran or its proxies use this as an opportunity to attack U.S. forces, we will respond appropriately. Yep. Okay. Last question, Nat.
Thanks, Pat. I just wanted to clarify a few things that you said. In terms of Iran's capabilities going forward, is it clear from the U.S. side that the imminent risk is over of another attack from Iran?
Well, look, it's something we're going to keep an eye on. We certainly hope that there's not another attack, but obviously Iran maintains a capability and it's just demonstrated that they're willing to use it to directly attack Israel. And so we're going to continue to consult closely with Israel on next steps and importantly on the defense of Israel. So,
and on Israel's limited incursion, have they provided any sort of a timeline on how long they would stay there?
I'd refer you to Israel to talk about that. I don't think it'd be appropriate for me to talk about that. Hey, folks, while there's been an understandable focus today on the Middle East, before we conclude, I would like to provide a quick update on a topic closer to home as DoD continues to work with federal, state, and local officials to support Hurricane Helene response efforts. As of this morning, the department has more than 6,500 service members actively engaged in relief efforts across 6 states. Florida has nearly 3,500.
General Patrick Ryder talking about the U.S. involvement in helping Israel in this latest attack from Iran. General Ryder is saying that 2 Navy destroyers were involved in aiding Israel, the Cole and the Valkyrie. I'll say that ABC News was able to confirm amongst its sources that at least 1 ship was involved. But General Ryder saying that U.S. forces fired approximately 12 interceptors to help out here. Currently, there is no order to evacuate from the State Department. I want to bring in Ann Flaherty for more on this. And Ann, General Ryder, at the end of this press conference, mentioned that they were going to be consulting with Israel on the next steps. Obviously, there's a lot of concern about rising tensions as Israel prepares to retaliate and respond here. But what could these consultations look like? Are we getting a sense yet?
Well, I think the first thing that they're going to try to find out is what kind of damage was done on the ground. We had 20 minutes before these attacks began. We had Israel and the U.S. putting out a statement saying that the defense ministers had spoken and believed that Iran should face serious consequences if they try to attack Israel. Of course, now that those attacks quickly became underway, the Pentagon dialing back that message and saying, look, we need some time to go through this. We need to understand what's happening. You mentioned the 2 destroyers in the region. Those 2 naval destroyers launching some dozen interceptors. We don't know if they were successful. We don't know how many missiles they were able to shoot down. We did hear from General Pat Ryder just now that he does believe that there wasn't significant damage on the ground in Israel. So now what they're going to do is try to take a step back and see what exactly had happened and what needs to happen next. My guess is that Israel will want to respond somehow. And the question becomes, of course, will the U.S. serve in any kind of role, a military support role, in those attacks, or will it simply say, what they've been saying, which is we stand by in this region to defend Israel and also to defend our troops. There are 40,000 troops in the region. So that is top of mind for everyone in this building, that they do not want to see attacks on those forces in the region. We just heard from General Ryder saying that they are not aware of any attacks at this point. But, certainly the tension is so high at this point that everybody wants to dial back some of these tensions and see what happens next.
Certainly there, Ann, and we also heard from General Ryder. He said we will take necessary steps to defend our people if we are attacked by Iran or its proxies. But to your earlier point about the damage assessments, I want to take this to Inez de la Catera, who's actually in Tel Aviv right now. I mean, what are you seeing on the ground there? Obviously, U.S. Early reports saying that the damage isn't that great, but I mean, you have a vantage point. What are you seeing there?
Yeah, Alex, I mean, I think people were certainly very afraid when this all unfolded. But when it comes to the actual damage, so we know that there were no reported casualties as of now. And when it comes to the actual, damage of buildings and sites, we're still waiting to get the full picture on that. I will tell you, we did hear very loud booms when we were in the shelter as this was all happening. We understand that there are some sites that have been struck, though it's unclear, the extent of the damage to those sites. We know that there were, a number of places in central Israel targeted, military sites that were targeted, and there was kind of video circulating showing, what appears to be kind of explosions in that general area. But again, unclear if those military sites were actually hit, if it was just, interceptions, debris falling. We're still waiting to learn more. We know that Jerusalem was also a big target. Our colleagues there reporting loud interceptions there. So again, still waiting for more details on that front. And of course, waiting to see what happens next and what the Israeli response will be. The Israelis have vowed to retaliate. They say they will do so at a time and place of their choosing. Unclear what that will look like. Unclear what the U.S. will advise Israel, whether the U.S. will be on board here. We have seen, just in the last few days, everything going on with Hezbollah and Israel taking out Hassan Nasrallah. There does seem to be a little bit of daylight there between the U.S. and Israel. The U.S. had been pushing for diplomacy. Israel just went ahead with that strike on Nasrallah as planned. So Israel does appear to be growing, or I should say the Israeli government, the Israeli prime minister does appear to be growing increasingly comfortable with defying the U.S. And it'll be interesting to see, as Israel decides how to respond to Iran here, whether, the U.S. and Israel are in lockstep or whether it's another kind of issue that divides the two.
All right. Well, and Inez, thank you for that. Foreign correspondent Marcus Moore is in Beirut. And Marcus, already we're hearing from Iran's president who basically called out Benjamin Netanyahu on Twitter. He's saying that these attacks were based on legitimate rights. We're also hearing from Iran's supreme leader who's echoing those sentiments. But I'm curious, for where you are right there, I mean, what's been the reaction on the ground? What are you seeing?
Well, Alex, there was a very quick reaction. We heard the sounds of gunfire in the air, celebratory gunfire, and there have also been scenes in some parts of Beirut of people dancing and playing music in the streets, celebrating the Iranian rocket barrage on Israel. That was the immediate response, and it comes at a time of very high tension here, as you well know. Israel has been in the midst of a constant and an ongoing bombardment, not only here in Beirut, but also southern Lebanon, and that continued up through today and through the evening. And so people here have been on edge. Many have been forced from their homes in the southern suburbs of Beirut. And then you had this latest development. And what it really has done, it has certainly escalated or increased the potential for yet another escalation. And Alex, as you know, that's something that U.S. officials and other world leaders have called for the opposite of that. They've called for de-escalation, and they want diplomacy to work. But what we have seen so far is that diplomacy seems to have fallen short. And if I can, Alex, I do want to go back to a point that the State Department made regarding Americans here in Lebanon. We learned from the State Department this evening that there are about 6,000 Americans who have registered with the State Department here in Lebanon as we speak. There have been questions about whether or not the U.S. has evacuation plans for those Americans should they decide they want to leave in the midst of this ongoing crisis. And what we've heard from the State Department and this evening, as you heard from the spokesperson, there are no specific evacuation plans. Instead, the State Department is telling people to follow the guidance, and that includes securing commercial flights while those commercial flights remain available. But Alex, trying to book a commercial flight right now is incredibly difficult. We've talked to Americans who are here. Some of them have expressed some interest in leaving, but they said that their earliest opportunity to secure a ticket stretches out for a couple of weeks. And they say, who knows what could happen between now and then. So we'll have to watch and wait to see, Alex, exactly how that plays out. But there is indeed a lot of concern as we have seen Iran fire rockets at Israel. And now the question is, how will Israel respond to that? And what else will Israel be doing here in Lebanon as it relates to airstrikes and also that ground incursion that's apparently underway in the south?
Yeah, Marcus, that was a really good point about the commercial flights. You know, we heard the allusion, the spokesperson alluding to the fact that maybe they would ramp up flights, but still, you're already seeing people that are having to wait weeks to book one. It seems like there's going to be a really, really big backlog for the 6,000 Americans that are still there, possibly trying to get out. I want to swing this over to ABC's Jay O'Brien, who's at the White House. Jay, I mean, obviously, we're hearing responses from the administration as it's pouring out. Secretary Blinken earlier today basically highlighting that this Iranian attack was, in his words, quote, effectively defeated. But what are you hearing from the White House at this moment?
What we've heard from White House officials is twofold. One, they say President Biden is getting minute-to-minute updates on this situation, and he did in the Situation Room while this was transpiring. And the White House is highlighting, as the Pentagon did in that briefing you just heard, that the U.S. assisted the Israelis in shooting down a number of these missiles. It's about a dozen interceptor missiles that were fired from U.S. assets. About 180 missiles were fired overall at Israel. Obviously, Israel has a robust air defense system itself as well, Alex. So the U.S. pointing to the fact that they helped Israel defend themselves as it relates to these missiles, but also on the second part of this, lingering questions that U.S. officials continue to face, as you saw in that briefing, as you saw in Jake Sullivan's briefing, the national security advisor, when he spoke to the White House press corps here at the White House just moments ago. White House officials really unable to say at this hour how Israel plans to respond and how Israel plans to retaliate in the aftermath of this strike, and what role, if any, the U.S. would play in that Israeli operation. Jake Sullivan said that they are in, quote, close, rather I should say, ongoing consultations with the Israelis, that those conversations are happening at the military level, presumably between the Pentagon and their counterparts in the Israeli military, as well as between the White House and the office of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, although it's unclear, and Sullivan was unable to answer this question as to whether or not Biden and Netanyahu plan to speak one-on-one today. So there is this lingering question. What will Israel do, and what role, if any, the U.S. would play in this response? What we've seen from Jake Sullivan on down, though, is U.S. officials say they do not want this incident to spiral into a wider war in that region, while at the same time understanding that Israel has a right to defend itself and has a right to, in a way, retaliate against these strikes.
Well, and Jay, the other part of this is it's already playing out on the campaign trail. Former President Trump campaigning in Wenatchee, Wisconsin. And look, I mean, he's alluded to this before at campaign rallies, this idea of us being on the brink of World War III. And look, I mean, this is the second attack by Iran on Israel that at least preliminary reports are showing that it was largely ineffective. But still, you see the former president leaning into this on the campaign trail. But detail for us, I mean, how is this playing out in 2024 in that race?
So what the White House has tried to do is cast that President Biden and Vice President Harris, who was also in the Situation Room with the president today, have a steady hand on all of this, that they are trying to temper the situation, make sure it doesn't spiral into a wider war, while also having Israel's back, particularly in defending itself against this attack by Iran. What former President Trump has tried to do is say the exact opposite, that this is a chaotic situation in the Middle East, and try to blame President Biden and to some extent Vice President Harris for this as well. Here's what Trump said on the campaign trail in that vein a little bit ago, Alex.
A short time ago, Iran launched 181 ballistic missiles at Israel, and I've been talking about World War III for a long time, and I don't want to make predictions because the predictions always come true. We're not going to make but they are very close to global catastrophe. We have a non-existent president and a non-existent vice president who should be in charge, but nobody knows what's going on.
So, Alex, what the White House would say in response to that, presumably, is that President Biden was engaged in the Situation Room while this attack was ongoing, as was Vice President Kamala Harris, as were other administration officials, like the National Security Advisor, like Secretary of State Antony Blinken, as the State Department says. But also, what the White House has said is that they are trying to actually do the exact opposite as to what former President Trump alleges, which is try to make sure that this situation does not spiral any further out of control, and that any Israeli response, A, respects Israel's right to defend itself, but also, B, doesn't make the situation in the Middle East any worse. Alex.
Our thanks to you, Jay O'Brien. I want to take this back over to Ann Flaherty at the Pentagon. And Ann, I mean, you heard Jay really kind of highlighting how the U.S. is trying to keep this from spiraling out of control. What does that look like with our troop presence on the ground in the region?
Well, Alex, we heard earlier this week from the Pentagon that they are rushing more troops to the region. They said they put that number in the thousands, and they said it would be mostly air power, so it's F-16s, F-22s. They scrambled to get those air assets in place. I was told that only some of them were in place when this attack began. That would explain why the U.S. was so frustrated with Israeli military action in Lebanon. They wanted the ability, the advance notice, to have enough troops in the region to protect the 40,000 troops that are already there. So, you know, of course, you saw them scrambling to reinforce those positions. We know that the USS Lincoln Carrier Strike Group was ordered to stay, not to redeploy home. The USS Wasp, a Marine amphibious ship, is being told to stay in the region. All of this to prepare for potential evacuation of Americans, for example, from Lebanon. The U.S. has a stake in this, and they want to be given advance notice by the Israelis so that they can be prepared for these types of events. You know, it does make you wonder if they were fully prepared for this attack, because, as I said, those assets that were being deployed to the region earlier this week, only some of them were in place by the time the attack began to unfold.
Thanks for that. And I want to take this back to Inez de la Gatera, who's live for us in Tel Aviv. And Inez, can you put this into perspective for us? I mean, how does today's attack compare to that April 13th attack, which included drones and cruise missiles and also ballistic missiles? I mean, are we able to see any similarities, any differences there?
Yeah, Alex, so, you know, I think we had been bracing here in Israel, here in Tel Aviv especially, for some kind of response, either from Hezbollah or from Iran, you know, in the aftermath of the killing of Hassan Nasrallah on Friday. We knew that response was coming. Hezbollah had said it would respond. Iran had said it would respond. We didn't know if it would come from, you know, either of those two actors, potentially Iranian proxies like the Houthis. There was back and forth between Israel and the Houthis over the weekend. In the end, Iran did decide to respond, just as it did back in April. And there certainly are similarities. I mean, hundreds of missiles fired at Israel from Iran. Back in April, you know, 99% of those missiles were intercepted. And so that attack was largely seen as performative. It felt that Iran at that point was trying to send a message to Israel that it could go after Israel if it wanted to, while at the same time fully knowing that those missiles would be intercepted by Israel's air defense systems. And that seems to have happened this time around as well. I will say the big difference, though, is the types of weapons that were used. So in this case, we understand it was mostly ballistic missiles, which are, you know, the fastest and, you know, most dangerous kinds of missiles. And so that is, I think, the big difference here. And we heard it from the Pentagon, you know, saying just moments ago that, you know, the fact that you are sending so many ballistic missiles at Israel, even if you know that most of them are going to be intercepted, clearly you're sending those missiles with the intent of causing damage. And so I think that might change things, you know, this time around. And again, just waiting to see what that response will be from Israel, whether the U.S. will get involved, and how that all plays out.
Thanks for that, Inez. And real quick, I want to go back to Jay O'Brien because, oh yeah, there's a debate tonight going on, a vice presidential debate. And so, you know, as if there wasn't enough to talk about on that debate stage, this is certainly going to play out in some capacity. But how are you expecting to see it enter that discussion?
Absolutely. I mean, given the news of the day, you can expect that this issue is probably going to play a leading role in this debate between J.D. Vance and Tim Walz tonight. And it's interesting because one of the key and stark differences between these two vice presidential candidates, among a lot of differences, are their stances on foreign policy. You see that really significantly when it comes to Ukraine. J.D. Vance has said he doesn't want another single dime of U.S. support to go to Ukraine. Tim Walz has, of course, said the exact opposite. But you also see it as well in the stances of these two candidates on U.S. support for Israel. How much should the U.S. be supporting Israel? How much should they be pushing for a ceasefire? Things of that nature. And so, given the events of today, given the U.S. role in defending Israel and shooting down some of these missiles, but also the U.S. pushing to make sure there isn't an escalation that would lead to a wider regional conflict, expect this issue to be one in which Walz and Vance clash tonight, given A, the news of the day, but given the fact that B, this is an issue that already these two candidates did not agree on, Alex.
All right, our thanks to all of our reporters and correspondents during this breaking news. And I also appreciate you for streaming with us. The news never stops. I'm Alex Perche. There's more news up next.
Harris, Walz, Trump, Vance. Now tonight, with just weeks to go until Election Day, the vice presidential candidates face each other and face off. Tim Walz, J.D. Vance, the vice presidential debate. The night starts at 8 p.m. Eastern, live with the ABC News event special, The Race for the White House, with David Muir and the ABC News Powerhouse political team. Tonight, starting at 8 p.m. Eastern on ABC.
Amanda Riley was a mother, wife, speaker at her church. Everybody loved her. She got diagnosed with cancer.
I heard the words, "You have stage 3 blood cancer."
When Amanda told me she had cancer, I was so devastated.
A beloved young Christian woman fighting a battle undeserved.
We gave our hearts, our prayers. We thought she was God's gift, but she was a liar.
Why would somebody fake cancer?
Thousands of people threw money at her. The community raised $100,000.
What surprised me is the lengths that she went to fake the cancer. There's all these pictures of her in the hospital with IVs, tubing.
She was accused of faking cancer. She hurt tons of people.
It was only a matter of time until Amanda's whole world came tumbling down.
Oh my God! I was like, ha, you're lying and you're getting caught. This is over. But it wasn't, not even close.
Scamanda premieres Wednesday on ABC and stream on Hulu. What does it take to be the most watched newscast in America?
An operation to capture ISIS fighters.
Is this our Combat Operations Center?
We're approaching the gate now. Militants came in from 4 or 5 different directions.
Operational nuclear reactor.
So you have a couple loaded and ready to go. The house is destroyed, but the flag, there's not a tear in it.
Not a tear in it.
How important is this label right here, Made in the USA? Look at your smile. You're proud of this.
I love this.
Great work. Hi. Where are you? Where are you? Appreciate you. Thank you.
David, good to meet you.
Ismail? David.
David.
Yes, yes. I'm David Muir.
I know who you are.
You
I watch
do?
you every night.
ABC's World News Tonight with David Muir is America's most watched newscast. Whenever news breaks,
We are here in Israel, a nation at war.
In Rolling Fork, this tornado tore through this town.
Lewiston, Maine.
The scene of a horrific mass shooting.
From the scene of that deadly missile strike.
Wherever the story is.
We're going to take you there.
ABC News Live. They're streaming ABC News Live.
ABC News Live, streaming free everywhere.
Reporting from the path of Hurricane Helene in Tallahassee, Florida, I'm Victor Oquendo. Wherever the story is, we'll take you there. You're streaming ABC News Live.
Sex, lies, and a double murder.
2 small children were kidnapped.
Your mom and dad are gonna be right here waiting on you when you get home.
When the twist came, then it completely exploded.
It's one of the craziest stories I've ever heard, and people don't know about it.
What kind of mother would kill her own children?
After nearly 30 years in prison, Smith now has a chance at parole. Could the woman once dubbed the most hated mom in America go free?
Killer Mom, now streaming on Hulu.
Whenever, wherever news breaks, it's so important to always remember that lives are changed. Here in London, in Buffalo, Uvalde, Texas,
Edinburgh, Scotland, from Poland once again tonight. Thank you so much for streaming with us. Ukrainian refugees here in Warsaw.
Do you think you'll ever be able to go back home? We're heading to a small community outside of Mexico City.
Splintered houses and splintered lives. The magnitude of the devastation. You're streaming ABC News Live. Reporting from Rolling Fork, Mississippi. Santa Fe, New Mexico. Raleigh, North Carolina. The U.S. Capitol. Mayfield, Kentucky.
Minneapolis,
Mexico. Tongass National Forest, Alaska.
Getting you behind the stories as they happen, giving you a front row seat to our world as it plays out in real time, live.
ABC News Live Prime. We'll take you there.
Stream ABC News Live weeknights, America's most honored streaming news program, only on ABC News Live. Streaming free right now wherever you stream your news. You're watching America's #1 streaming news, ABC News Live.
I'm Kate Whitworth here in Los Angeles, and we have breaking news right now on ABC News Live. Israel says it will have a significant response after Iran's massive missile attack on the country. We have some video to show you, and it looks like dozens of missiles flying across the sky over Tel Aviv. That's followed by the sound of explosions. Now, Israeli Defense Forces say that nearly 180 missiles were fired from Iran toward Israel and that most were intercepted. But several hits were identified, and the damage right now is being assessed. The Pentagon puts the number of missiles that Iran fired at about 200. So again, this is developing. President Biden taking to X, posting, quote, "The U.S. is prepared to help Israel defend itself against Iran." Biden saying he and Vice President Kamala Harris are monitoring the attack from the White House Situation Room. Though Secretary of State Antony Blinken also says it appears Israel has effectively defeated Iran's attack. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps confirming responsibility, saying it targeted 3 Israeli military bases around Tel Aviv, adding that the missile attack was a retaliation for recent assassinations carried out by Israel, targeting leaders of Iranian proxy groups. Now, meanwhile, Israeli officials are saying at least 6 people were shot and killed in a suspected terror attack in Tel Aviv. They also say that both shooters were killed by police. I want to bring in ABC News' Inez de la Catera. She's live for us in Tel Aviv. Our senior national policy reporter Ann Flaherty at the Pentagon. ABC's Jay O'Brien at the White House. ABC News national security and defense analyst Mick Mulroy, along with retired U.S. Marine Corps Colonel and ABC News contributor Stephen Ganyard. Thank you all for being here with us. First of all, Inez, I know it's early, but what can you tell us about any possible damage there in Israel? I know they're still assessing it at this moment.
Yeah, Kana, so they are still assessing the situation. The good news is that as of now, there are no reported casualties. When it comes to the actual damage to buildings and, infrastructure, it does appear that the damage is limited, but we are seeing video circulating that does show things like, craters in the road in some areas or, just dust everywhere. We know that military sites were targeted, and there is video circulating showing what appears to be kind of explosions near those military sites, but we are still waiting for word from the IDF there on what may have happened. They have said there is limited damage, but really, a remarkable night here in Israel. These missiles targeting the whole of the country. There were sirens going off here in Tel Aviv. We had to take cover. We heard those loud booms that we assume were interceptions. We know that that most of those missiles were intercepted. We know that there were interceptions over Jerusalem. Our colleagues there reporting that they could hear loud booms. And again, we know that Israeli military sites were targeted. The big question now is what comes next. How will the Israelis respond? They have vowed to retaliate. They say there will be consequences, and they say they will respond at a time and place of their choosing.
And noting here, we just got word in from the IDF. It sounds like there was a small number of hits in the center of Israel and other hits in southern Israel as well. And they note the majority of the incoming missiles were intercepted by Israel and a defensive coalition led by the United States. And as I know you already touched on this in terms of retaliation, but what were you hearing? Because we know early on there was a warning that they would retaliate if this were to happen. And now we understand the scale and the scope of this attack. Any word on retaliation?
Yes, it's still unclear what that retaliation will look like, but we do understand that it'll be quicker than it was last time around. So when you remember back in April when Iran launched that last barrage of missiles at Israel, it took 5 or 6 days for them to respond. The feeling is that this time around Israel will be a lot quicker, but they are warning of severe consequences. I think it'll be really interesting to see how the U.S. plays into all of this too. The U.S. just prior to this attack had also warned that there would be consequences if Iran did attack Israel. There has been, though, a growing divide there between the U.S. and Israel over what to do next, and we saw that playing out over the weekend with the attack on Hassan Nasrallah. The U.S. had been pushing for diplomacy, for a 21-day ceasefire, and yet Israel went ahead as planned with its attack on Nasrallah and on Hezbollah targets. So it'll be interesting to see when it comes to this and the response to Iran, how the U.S. and Israel decide to approach that situation.
Yeah, and I'd love to bring that question to Ann Flaherty there at the Pentagon. And what are you hearing in terms of how the U.S. will support Israel going forward?
Well, we did just hear from Major General Pat Ryder at the Pentagon, who said that 2 naval destroyers were responsible for firing at least a dozen interceptors during the attack. We don't know whether or not they were successful, how many missiles they may have shot down. But when we pressed him on this question of retaliation, will the U.S. play any kind of role in Israel's retaliation on this? Considering the fact that 20 minutes before the attack began, the Pentagon had put out a statement warning that there would be those severe consequences that we were just talking about. General Ryder then said, well, it could be security or economic consequences. So, seemingly trying to dial it back a little bit and saying, look, we don't know what we're going to do. We don't know what the Israelis are planning on doing. Right now, we're going to assess the situation, see what the damage is, see what role our troops played. And then, of course, top of mind is the security of the 40,000 troops that are in the region right now.
Well, and actually, Ann, that was my second question to you. How are U.S. positions in the region being reinforced right now?
Well, we did hear earlier this week from the Pentagon that they are sending additional air power to the region. I was told that as the attacks were unfolding, that all of those assets were not fully in place. That's, of course, a reason why the U.S. wants to be given advance notice by Israel in its attacks in Lebanon and other places in the Middle East, because they want to be in position to support the forces that are already there. So those 40,000 troops already deployed. We know that they're reinforcing that with thousands more, looking mostly like air power. They're also ordering the USS Lincoln carrier strike group to stay in the region, the USS Wasp, the marine capability there. Is particularly helpful if there is an evacuation from Lebanon, that the Marines are standing by. The U.S. saying, again, we're still assessing all of this right now. Nothing yet to report.
All right, Ann Flaherty, thank you. And Jay, I want to check in with you there. We know that Vice President Harris and President Biden watched this from the Situation Room. We know that President Biden just yesterday reiterated his want for a ceasefire. But what are we hearing from the White House right now? And Jay, any chance that Biden and Netanyahu connect today over the phone?
It's unclear if the president and the prime minister are going to speak today. Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor, got that exact question in the White House press briefing just moments ago. He said he didn't have anything to preview in terms of a Biden-Netanyahu call, but that the White House and the prime minister's office, presumably their various staffs, are in close touch today. And President Biden has been following this, as Sullivan says, minute by minute. There's various phases that the president has followed here. First, that U.S. assisting Israel in shooting down some of those 180-plus missiles. That was the first element of today, and it was why President Biden and the vice president were in the Situation Room, to monitor that attack and the U.S. response in defending Israel to that attack. There is now a second phase that President Biden and his advisors have to monitor now, which is how Israel will respond and what role, if any, the U.S. would play in that Israeli response. What we've heard from Jake Sullivan and other administration officials on down is that there is a deep belief, of course, that Israel has a right to defend itself, but also a deep concern that the region could spiral into an even wider war and a more chaotic conflict, and a desire being expressed from the U.S. to their Israeli counterparts that the region doesn't devolve into a wider war. So it's unclear exactly how Israel will react and what, if any, role the U.S. would play in that, but certainly serious concerns tonight in the wake of this attack by Iran.
No question. And noting here from the IDF also saying we will respond wherever, whenever, and however we choose in accordance with the directive of the government of Israel. And so, Steve, on that note, in terms of retaliation, is it possible here? Do you anticipate Israel perhaps striking any Iranian oil refineries? And what would the aftermath of something like that look like?
Yeah, 100% there'll be some reaction, Kana. I do think that the Israelis did tell the White House earlier that any kind of retribution would include economic targets. So much of the Iranian economy is dependent on oil. Several of their transshipment points are very vulnerable. Karg Island, for one, 90% of all the oil coming out of Iran goes through Karg Island. So it'd be quite easy to take a good bit of the economy of Iran and shut it down very quickly. But remember that the real existential threat to Israel has always been the nuclear program, always been the Iranian desire to build a nuclear weapon. And so if they're going to go into Iran, you would expect that they would also go after some of those nuclear sites. They do not have the capability to go after very deep, hardened sites because they don't have bombers to carry the kind of ordnance required. But they will go after something that will at least try to delay the development of a nuclear weapon by Iran.
Well, and Mick, I'd love for you to weigh in on that because you and I have talked at length here over the past months about Iran trying to enrich their uranium and get to that point. What can you weigh in on that about?
So, Kana, this is one of the big risks that Iran took by attacking Israel. This gives Israel essentially a green light, especially from their perspective, to hitting some of these targets that Steve was just talking about. Israel has said over and over again that the economic targets, like the Bandar Abbas port, are actually closer in distance than the port in Hudaydah in Yemen, which they just struck. So they're basically telegraphing that this might be high on the target list. The nuclear side, yes, it would be very difficult for them to destroy their capability, but they certainly could delay it. As Steve said, they could essentially crush the entry points, all the things around there, make it very difficult. And they might just take that opportunity, one, to be able to do this and cause delay, but two, to basically be a test run for when they think they're fully capable, if they feel like they need to actually do devastating damage to their nuclear program. This is a question, what is a significant response? That's a question that Iran might find out as soon as tonight. And they're also probably wondering what is severe consequences. As the White House has thrown down that marker, there's a lot of questions about what is severe consequences, because most people would not think that sanctions alone would mark a severe consequence. But these are two things we'll have to see potentially very soon.
Right, and we're certainly hearing from Republicans about what a response to them should look like. Inez, Jay, Ann, Mick, and Steve, our thanks to all of you. We will continue to talk about this throughout the evening. I also want to bring in our former Senior Director for Counterterrorism on National Security Council, Javed Ali, for more on this. Javed, thank you so much for being here with us. So first of all, as you know, Iran has confirmed responsibility for this attack, saying it was in retaliation for assassinations carried out by Israel. How prepared do you think that Israel was for something like this to happen at this time when we know they also began their ground incursion into Lebanon?
So, Kana, nice to be with you again. And this, as folks on the previous panel talked about, this is to a degree a replay of what happened in April, but also with a different inventory of weapons, just purely ballistic missiles this time, or at least by all accounts, ballistic missiles, and not the combination of cruise missiles and drones and ballistic missiles like April. And the fact that it looks like all of these ballistic missiles were intercepted is a demonstration of Israel's capability. But this is just today. And I think what is going to be different going forward versus what happened in April, I don't think this is a one-off from Iran. And clearly, it seems like Israel is going to retaliate. So I think what we are seeing unfolding in front of our eyes is the climb up the escalatory ladder by Israel and Iran, and each side is going to keep punching back against each other. I don't think it's going to be like April, where even after the Iran salvo, that Israel did launch a response, pretty small, landed a couple drones or launched a couple drones, but sort of the hostility stopped at that point. I think we are in a completely different operational environment, and I think things are going to get even more intense in the coming days.
Well, I'm wondering if you can actually expand on that thought there for me, that you think this is perhaps not a one-off from Iran. I also, when you answer that question, I want to note to you that there was a question asked today of the Pentagon about the possibility of a hypersonic ballistic missile being used, some kind of new weaponry being used either in this one or potentially in the future. Can you elaborate on that?
So getting to the point about how Iran is going to react, just given the pounding that Hamas and Hezbollah, its two of its strongest partners in the axis of resistance, and not the two strongest, that it had to do something different. And then the death, and this hasn't really been talked about that much, but in the strike against Hassan Nasrallah on Friday, which killed several of the senior Hezbollah leadership, to include the Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah, the deputy commander of the IRGC Quds Force was also killed. And the Iranians don't forget things like that, whether it was Qasem Soleimani in 2020, the two Quds Force generals who died in April. So they're going to have a long memory for his death as well. And that's why I think this escalatory ladder is going to continue to ratchet up. Getting back to the hypersonic issue, Iran has hinted over the past couple of years that they have these hypersonic weapons that the Russians and the Chinese have. Whether they got them from them, we don't know. But these are weapons that fly 5 to 6 times the speed of sound, and it would be very, very difficult for even the interception capabilities between Israel and the United States and other countries to knock those kind of weapons down, because they fly faster and they have a different flight profile as well. So whether one of those was used today or whether they will be used in the future remains to be seen. But Iran has already boasted that they have those types of weapons.
That is a certainly concerning thought. Javed Ali, thank you for being here with us today. Coming up next on ABC News Live, the Mideast crisis escalating as J.D. Vance and Tim Walz prepare for their debate showdown in New York, what each vice presidential candidate has at stake, and how this crisis could factor in to that discussion. That's next.
It's not about the fear or the danger or the risk. It's about the love of flying.
David Muir, ABC's World News Tonight, the most watched newscast in America, and honored with the Emmy Award, winner for Outstanding Live News Program. More Americans watch World News Tonight with David Muir than any other newscast.
Did you kill Mary Yoder?
Sorry. No, I did not kill Mary Yoder.
Little Miss Innocent.
I know it wasn't me. So if it wasn't me, who was it?
Only on Hulu.
Tonight, with just weeks to go until Election Day, watch the vice presidential debate live on ABC. The night starts with the ABC News special, The Race for the White House, with David Muir and the ABC News political team. Tonight on ABC.
Welcome back. President Biden is speaking at the White House right now, so we want to take a listen in.
And I mean it sincerely, because we've been through a lot of these. My top priority is to ensure the communities devastated by this hurricane get the help and support they need as quickly as possible. As quickly as possible. As we watch the storm from the Gulf region form.
All right, and as you just were seeing and hearing there, the president is speaking. He is addressing both the crisis in the Middle East as well as Hurricane Helene and the aftermath and destruction there. We will turn these comments and bring them right back to you as soon as we can. You're watching ABC News Live. And earlier today, former President Trump told the crowd at a campaign event in Wisconsin that the world right now, in his opinion, is spiraling out of control.
A short time ago, Iran launched 181 ballistic missiles at Israel, and I've been talking about World War III for a long time, and I don't want to make predictions because the predictions always come true. We're not going to make, but they are very close to global catastrophe. We have a non-existent president and a non-existent vice president who should be in charge, but nobody knows what's going on.
Well, meanwhile, Senator J.D. Vance is preparing to debate Governor Tim Walz for the first and likely only time before this election. A reminder there, it's just 35 days away. The two vice presidential nominees will go head-to-head for 90 minutes on key issues like the crisis in the Middle East, as well as the economy, abortion, immigration, and more. ABC News senior reporter Catherine Folders is joining me now for more on this. So, Catherine, glad to have you here with us. And first of all, look, in the last debate, former President Trump, he actually claimed that the war in the Middle East would never have happened if he were in office. He said Israel will not exist 2 years from now if Vice President Harris is elected. Harris, of course, went on to say she supports Israel's ability to defend itself, in particular as it relates to threats from Iran. But Catherine, how do you expect J.D. Vance and Walz to respond in this debate to the latest attacks now on Israel?
Well, it's a good question, and it will certainly be front and center here. And Vance is known in some ways to get ahead of Trump on foreign policy. He hasn't said much on this topic yet. Of course, you saw former President Trump put out a post on his social media site where he essentially criticized the administration for doing nothing. Of course, President Biden was in a briefing with Vice President Kamala Harris at the time, being briefed on this topic. So, Kana, to your point, it will certainly be front and center here at the debate, and especially with the crisis evolving, and we just don't know what would happen next in terms of any retaliatory steps. So they really are in some ways responding in real time during this debate. So what they say on this will be fascinating. Governor Walz hasn't really weighed in much on this or said much on this. So how he responds to this, of course, as his running mate was being briefed on this at the White House earlier today, all of that will be something to watch. I'm sure the focus here will shift a bit, of course, to Israel and Iran, but also I'm sure a lot of questions on foreign policy.
Well, and in terms of foreign policy, let's also talk about Ukraine, right? We also know that Trump as well said that the war in Ukraine would never have happened if he were president. So how critical will also that issue be tonight, Catherine, given that Ukraine's president just met with both former President Trump and Vice President Harris last week?
Right, exactly. And you remember that meeting with Trump was a bit up in the air. Of course, it finally did happen at Trump Tower. But I think that is something where Vance has to figure out how he toes this line here with his foreign policy, with former President Trump's foreign policy. Of course, the vice president is viewed as an attack dog in lots of ways, but he has gotten ahead of him on this issue. So how does he respond to that? I mean, you're obviously with Trump's comments that you're repeating on the wars, whether it has to do with Ukraine and Russia, whether it has to do with Israel and Iran, the one commonality there is that he really says the same thing, right? He says these wars wouldn't have happened if I were president. That is, he's going to fix it if he comes back. But the reality of this is that he hasn't offered any specifics on exactly how that will happen. Does Vance do that tonight? Does he do that for him? We just have to wait and see.
Right, and we're hearing from House GOP leadership saying the world needs America to return to a maximum presence, maximum pressure campaign against Iran. So it'll be interesting to see if J.D. Vance on the Republican side there is in lockstep with that statement. All right, senior reporter Catherine Falders, our thanks to you as always. Coming up next here on ABC News Live, the latest on that major escalation in the Middle East after Iran fires a barrage of missiles at Israel. More on what we know at this hour, straight ahead.
Whenever news breaks,
we are here in Israel, a nation at war after that brutal surprise attack by Hamas.
On the ground in Ukraine, reporting from Lewiston, Maine.
The scene of a horrific mass shooting.
ABC News Live is right there everywhere.
From the scene of that deadly missile strike in Dnipro, Ukraine.
Reporting from the earthquake in Turkey.
In Rolling Fork, this tornado tore through this little town.
From the most devastating disaster in Hawaii.
From Charleston, South Carolina, on the 2024 campaign trail.
In Iceland. Let's go.
Traveling with the president in Mexico City.
Wherever the story.
From the front lines. From southern Israel.
Outside the Gaza Strip.
In Beirut.
From the FBI.
Reporting from the nurses on the picket line.
Here at 10 Downing Street in London.
Streaming live to you.
Wherever the story is.
Wherever the story is. Wherever the story is. We're going to take you there.
You're streaming ABC News Live.
ABC News Live.
You're streaming ABC News Live.
ABC News Live. Streaming free everywhere. America's #1 streaming news.
Amanda Riley was a mother, wife,
speaker at her church.
Everybody loved her. She got diagnosed with cancer.
I heard the words, "You have stage 3 blood cancer."
When Amanda told me she had cancer, I was so devastated.
A beloved young Christian woman fighting a battle undeserved.
We gave our hearts, our prayers.
We thought she was God's gift, but she was a liar.
Why would somebody fake cancer?
Thousands of people threw money at her.
The community raised $100,000.
What surprised me is the lengths that she went to fake the cancer. There's all these pictures of her in the hospital with IVs, tubing.
She was accused of faking cancer. She hurt tons of people.
It was only a matter of time until Amanda's whole world came tumbling down.
Oh my God. I was like, ha, you're lying and you're getting caught. This is over. But it wasn't, not even close.
Scamanda premieres Wednesday on ABC and stream on Hulu.
And welcome back. Of course, we are tracking the latest out of the Middle East for you after a barrage of missiles was launched from Iran toward Israel. Today's strike coming after an Israeli attack on Hezbollah infrastructure in Lebanon. The Pentagon saying that Iran launched about 200 missiles at Israel, but the IDF has put the number of projectiles closer to 180. Earlier, sources did say that they were expecting Iran to launch up to 250 in 2 separate waves at 4 targets in Israel that included Mossad headquarters as well as 3 air bases. I want to bring in ABC News' Jay O'Brien for us. So, Jay, we've been monitoring, of course, what's been coming out of the White House as well. We know that President Biden and Vice President Harris watched this all unfold in the Situation Room. And I know that President Biden just addressed the media here saying, at least so far, this attack appears in his mind to have been defeated and ineffective. What more are we hearing, Jay?
Yeah, exactly right, Kana. So the president and the vice president following this as it unfolded in the Situation Room, following this minute by minute, their staff said, as the U.S. assisted Israel in shooting down some of these missiles. The president, speaking with reporters just minutes ago, here's what he said.
Before I began, I wanted to say a few words about Iran's missile attack on Israel today. At my direction, the United States military actively supported the defense of Israel, and we're still assessing the impact. But based on what we know now, the attack appears to have been defeated and ineffective. And this is testament to Israeli military capability and U.S. military. It's also a testament to intensive planning between the United States and Israel to anticipate and defend against the brazen attack we expected. Make no mistake, the United States is fully supportive of Israel. And I've been spent the morning and part of the afternoon in the Situation Room and meeting with my whole national security team and consulting with the Israelis indirectly because, in terms of their impact on us. And the national security team has been, as I said, in constant contact with Israeli officials and their counterparts, and is going to continue to be brought to me throughout the day. We need to be all working together. The new coordination we have going.
So, Kana, the headline out of all of this were those 2 words you mentioned earlier, which is the president called this attack ineffective, and he says it was defeated. Nonetheless, we have heard administration officials say that this was a significant attack, and certainly Israel has said it will respond. So this is the administration trying to downplay, in a sense, this incident, saying it was defeated, calling it insignificant, but still that open question, what will Israel do? Another thing is we do not know today if President Biden will speak with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The two have had a chilly relationship as of late, but they say their staffs in the Prime Minister's office and the White House are communicating very closely. Kana.
All right, Jay O'Brien, our thanks to you. And thank you for streaming with us. I'm Kana Whitworth, and we have a lot more news ahead here on ABC News Live. Complete breaking coverage of the escalating crisis in the Middle East and Iran's retaliatory missile attack on Israel. Also tonight, we'll have full team coverage of the CBS News vice presidential debate between Governor Tim Walz and Senator J.D. Vance starting tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern right here on ABC News Live.
Wherever news breaks, it's so important.